My YouTube channel, Dreamland Encounters, shares mysterious real-life stories that might help people fall asleep. Late March brought a chilly evening where our breath hung visibly in the air after sunset. That Friday night I was 17 and in my final year of high school in Kakali, hanging out with 3 friends, Ewan, Grant and Lisa. We sat on a low stone wall near coastal dunes, casually eating chips from a local shop and watching the tide roll in. Street lights behind us barely reached into the darkness, leaving us mostly surrounded by shadows with only a distant town's glow visible. Around 9:30 or 10 at night, an unusual silence suddenly descended. The usual seaside wind disappeared completely. We'd been laughing about something Grant had said when Lisa pointed towards the water, drawing our attention to something peculiar. What she spotted wasn't a boat's light, but something entirely different. 3 perfectly spaced lights hovered just above the horizon, glowing a dull orange like dying coals. They remained completely motionless and stationary. Curiosity got the better of us, and we stood up on the wall to get a clearer view. The lights were far enough away that we couldn't determine whether they were over water or in the sky. Ewan tried filming the lights with his phone, but the screen showed only black. He attempted again with the flash on, yet still captured nothing. Frustrated, he put the phone away. We watched these lights for about a minute, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. No sound, no movement. While we debated whether these could be flares or some unknown aircraft, the middle light suddenly dropped straight down into the water. Or at least that's how it appeared. Simultaneously, the other 2 lights blinked out, leaving only dark sea. We waited, hoping for more to happen, but nothing did. The wind returned abruptly, cold and salty. We silently agreed not to tell our parents about this strange experience and headed home. The weekend passed normally, and by Monday morning's first period maths class, we were back to our routine. It wasn't until 3rd period English that we really started discussing what we'd seen that night. Something wasn't right. Evans detected something unusual, prompting Coe to briefly leave and return looking unsettled. Lunch brought more tension. A younger teacher whispered near the staff room, her hushed words causing unease. They were asking about discussions of the sky, something we hadn't mentioned to anyone. 2 men in impeccably pressed black suits had earlier walked down the corridor toward the staff room, their appearance unnaturally crisp, like they'd just stepped out of a formal hearing. One tall and thin, the other shorter but broader. Lisa approached me at the lockers, confirming with Gran that we'd noticed these strangers. Nothing about them seemed normal. Their pale faces, perfectly parted hair, and complete lack of official documentation made them stand out dramatically in our school environment. Later, these men conversed with Mr. Orbs, the head teacher, who appeared distinctly uncomfortable. Their glances toward us weren't casual, but calculated, as if mentally checking off a list of faces. By the last period, they had vanished completely. An office staff member, when questioned, claimed no knowledge of their presence, her tone suggesting deliberate avoidance. Strange occurrences began mounting. A black car parked motionless across from the school during lunch breaks, windows up, driver never visible. My phone started behaving oddly, unexplained clicking sounds during calls, screen recording apps opening unprompted. Lisa shared that her mother had answered the house phone one night to only hear breathing. Hiking halfway up Arthur's Seat, I spotted something extraordinary. A bright, symmetrical object hovered above the eastern slope, completely still. The winter sky was pale blue, the city feeling washed out and quiet after recent snowmelt. My habit of carrying a camera meant capturing this moment was natural. Initially, I considered it might be a drone or weather balloon, but its behavior was different, unnaturally still, not reflecting sunlight in any expected way. That night at Lisa's, we were deeply unsettled. Ewan insisted he'd told no one about the lights, and we were certain none of us had posted anything online. Something was definitely happening. Nor walking home one evening a few weeks back, I stumbled upon an unusual scene near a bus stop. 2 men stood motionless, dressed identically in suits, their gazes fixed ahead. When a car briefly passed between us, they mysteriously disappeared. The encounter left me uncertain whether it had been real or imagined. During a later photography session capturing landscapes, the environment seemed to shift subtly. City noise faded to a background hum, and the air felt thick. I carefully held my breath while taking photographs, ensuring sharp focus. Motionless, I watched as an object remained perfectly still before vanishing without transition. On a coastal path where we'd previously noticed unusual lights, an eerie tension enveloped us. Sounds felt amplified, distant traffic, wind, and gull cries. We left after just 10 minutes, detecting nothing extraordinary. Back home, computer analysis revealed something remarkable. The object appeared distinctly in multiple photographs, right against the trees, exactly as I'd seen it. Each time I zoomed and adjusted contrast, it reappeared clearly. The next morning, at my small independent design studio, two men in crisp black suits entered. Their white shirts, plain ties, and gleaming shoes reflected light across the creaky, exposed brick floor. The taller one spoke with a controlled, uneven voice. "Good morning. We need to inspect your camera for errors." Confused, I stammered about my camera. They approached methodically, the shorter companions silently scanning every inch of the office. Their gaze felt calculated, measuring distances, analyzing monitor angles, and assessing the room's entire layout. Something about their presence felt compelling, pushing me to comply despite my reservations. They handled my camera with unusual precision, manipulating the lens and buttons in a peculiar manner. As I stared at the computer screen, something strange unfolded. A few minutes passed and two men exchanged a knowing glance. They noted some errors, and one of them simply said, "That will suffice." Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished. No goodbye, no explanation, no trace left on the dusty floor. Now, whenever someone mentions inspectors or school visitors, I think of those two men in black suits who seemed to know something about the sky before anyone spoke. Even now, driving at night, I find myself scanning the horizon for those mysterious orange glows. Not my photographs told a story that defied explanation. That evening, after carefully checking my images, I discovered the mysterious object had vanished completely. Where there had once been a bright shape hovering above a slope, now only empty space remained. The clouds and sun positions were unchanged, but the unusual element had disappeared. I exhausted every possible method of verification. Different programs, another computer, my backup memory card, each attempt revealed the same result. Doubt began to erode my confidence. Had I imagined everything? Yet my original backup files from the previous night had initially shown the object clearly. And now even those had transformed. Seeking clarity, I contacted Mark, a hobbyist photographer and trusted friend. As I described the photos and strange circumstances, he suggested a lens flare. Something deeper told me this was more significant. Within a week, bizarre details started emerging. Black cars with tinted windows appeared near my studio vehicles I'd never seen before. Figures in long coats lingered just beyond my peripheral vision. The connection felt unmistakable. Men in nondescript coats stood at the street's edge, watching intently and perfectly still, then vanishing the moment I turned to look directly at them. Rational explanations crumbled. The camera incident, the missing object, the mysterious men's silence, all systematically dismantled my attempts to dismiss the experience. Seeking understanding, I returned to Arthur's Seat one night. City lights twinkled below while mist rolled across the hills. My camera remained ready, scanning constantly. No bright shape, drone, or lens flare appeared, yet the sensation of being watched persisted, subtle but undeniable. Shadows seemed exaggerated. Slight movements in the fog felt like deliberate intrusions. Since that night, I've never left my camera unattended, whether in the office or at home. I rarely discuss the incident, knowing how implausible it sounds. I still review backup files, hoping the object might reappear or some error might reverse itself. It never does. They did this, the men in black, if that's what they were. I remain vigilant. Some experiences, once perceived, never truly leave you alone. I can't explain their arrival or why the photos changed, only that it happened 19 late September. I was driving home in my old white transit van, heading south on the A9 near Perth. The road was mostly empty, with occasional lorries breaking the monotony. Rain had been falling steadily all afternoon, a fine misty precipitation that doesn't look substantial until it soaks through your clothing. Around 9 o'clock, just past the Lancardi turnoff, a light caught my eye in the side mirror. At first, I thought it was a motorcycle, a single headlight bouncing through the darkness. But something felt off. Its movement was too consistent, too steady. No wobble, no variation in height. The glow wasn't a harsh white LED, but softer, almost pale. I was driving late at night on an empty stretch when this light appeared behind me, perfectly matching my van's speed. I knew the speed limit for vans was 60, but the road was long and deserted. I adjusted between 70 and 75. Rain blurred my windscreen, leaving only a pale glow visible in the rearview mirror. My hands grew sweaty on the steering wheel. I briefly wondered if it could be a drone, though that seemed impossible given the weather and speed. My speedometer needle sat at 72, an anchor in this surreal moment. The van's engine sounded normal, but the light behind me was peculiar. It didn't reflect on any surface, just hovering silently. When I needed to overtake a slower car, the light smoothly shifted position, now aligning with my left rear quarter. Approaching the Broxton roundabout, the light suddenly vanished. One moment it was there, the next completely gone. I slowed down, expecting its return, but nothing happened. By the time I reached home and Craig, I'd rationalized it as a strange reflection or misunderstood vehicle light. 3 days later, 2 men appeared at my garage. I worked part-time from a small unit behind an industrial estate. They arrived without warning. But on the hill where the city sprawls beneath and wind slices through, something feels off. A quiet dread settles in my chest, making me question everything around me. I keep climbing, keep taking photos, wondering if something watches from the misty edges. 2 men appeared at my garage one drizzly morning. They were dressed identically, dark suits, white shirts, black ties, and looked completely out of place. One was tall, around 6'2", with a narrow face and slicked back dark hair. The other was shorter, with a rounder head and nearly invisible pale eyebrows. Both seemed to be in their mid-40s. The taller man spoke first, his voice unnervingly flat. "Did your speedometer stop at 72, he asked. Confused, I responded with a what? He repeated the question slower. I nervously laughed and assured him my speedometer worked fine. He tilted his head slightly, bird-like, more stating than asking. His silent companion stared directly at me, his light grey eyes making me want to look away. His face was completely blank. No emotion, no reaction. I tried to sound casual, offering help and explaining this was a garage for car troubles. They methodically surveyed the entire unit, scanning racks of tires, oil drums, and the floor. The taller one spoke again, and I stammered, asking who they were. They exchanged a look I couldn't understand. The taller man issued a warning and walked out. I followed to the doorway, watching them move. By the time I stepped outside, they were already halfway down Elaine Wood Street. No vehicle, no umbrella, just 2 men walking perfectly in sync away from the property. Strange occurrences began to pile up. My phone screen remained black despite charging, refusing to activate for a full minute. Friday morning was unusually quiet, with no calls coming through. A warm electronic smell lingered in the area. A customer mentioned 2 council workers had been asking about me, but when checked, the council denied sending anyone. Weeks after that strange night, the signs started small. My van's dash clock ran 2 hours slow, and an old black Jaguar seemed to hover near the by. Estate when I closed up. Driving home, I compulsively checked my mirrors, seeing only rain and headlights. Every strange detail drew me closer to understanding, yet the full story remained elusive. My cottage sits at the edge of a sheep pasture in Lowick, where silence dominates even by Shetland's quiet standards. No street lights pierce the darkness, just sea wind and occasional passing cars. One Thursday night about a month ago, my life took an unexpected turn while I was outside with a mug of tea, unwinding after working on my boat engine. Near midnight, something caught my attention. At first, I mistook them for satellites, tiny moving dots in the sky, but these weren't normal. 3 or 4 white lights flickered, not bright, but like distant stars being manipulated by invisible strings. One light zipped across the entire sky in less than a second, then halted completely. I stood frozen, watching an unexplained aerial display moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. The lights danced, forming a triangle before splitting apart. No sound, no trails. I tried grabbing my phone, but by the time I returned, the sky was empty. I didn't tell anyone, not out of fear, but because I knew how crazy it would sound. My neighbor Callum would have laughed it off as local folklore or military exercises. A week later, 2 men in plain black suits appeared at my door, seemingly out of nowhere. No car, no footprints on the wet gravel. Their clothes looked impossibly dry. The taller one spoke first, his voice completely flat. "Have you heard the clicking noise?" No introduction, no pleasantries. The shorter man hung back while the taller one questioned me. "Did you hear it during the event?" I asked. "What event?" My stomach was sinking. I hadn't told anyone about the lights. My wife works on the mainland most weeks and wasn't home that night. The only living thing nearby was the neighbor's collie. Now, whenever I drive and the speedometer approaches, the road near late feels different. I keep checking my mirrors, waiting for that pale glow to reappear. It hasn't, and I always ease back down to 60 without thinking. Two men stood in my hallway, their faces blank and eyes unfocused. I couldn't tell if they were with the council, thinking about the pasture or the boat. They didn't respond to my questions. I hadn't heard anything, but the taller one tilted his head like a bird listening. "No clicks at all?" he asked, though it didn't sound like a real question. I simply answered, "No." Just as quickly as they appeared, they turned and walked down the gravel drive. The taller one had first scanned my walls, saying precisely, "If you notice the clicking, note the intervals." By the time I got my boots on and stepped outside, they had vanished. The drive stretched long and straight with a clear view to the road, but there was nothing, no vehicle, just drizzle and gulls. That night marked the first time I heard it. Lying in bed with everything silent except the wind against the window, a faint click would sound, not constant, but like a fingernail tapping glass somewhere in the room. I checked everything, boiler, fuse box, fridge, nothing. The cottage remained silent, yet when I lay back down, another click would emerge. Sleep became elusive. The sound was unpredictable. Sometimes a single sharp tick, sometimes a cluster, like an incomprehensible Morse code. I attempted to record it on my phone, but playback revealed only room noise. This continued for a week. No mysterious men, no strange lights, just soft clicks in the silence. I stopped talking about it, not wanting to make it real. I turned on the radio at night to mask the sound, but when switched off, the clicks would return, softer yet persistent. One evening, a dark Jaguar with no readable plates parked down the lane facing my cottage. As I stepped outside, it rolled away slowly, without lights. The sheep didn't even stir. 2 nights later, I woke at 3 a.m. to find my kitchen light on, unusual for me. The back door was locked, but the bolt was positioned differently. Nothing was missing. Just small things slightly out of place. My mug from the sink now sat on the table. My boots had been turned to face outward. Late October found me camping near Lombe. The clearing I chose sat just north of the shore, secluded and private. My plan was straightforward. Set up the tent, start a fire, spend the night reading and listening to the lake. By 8 p.m., I'd finished setting up. My Howard presents for his Browns in fan. Parts I had. The fog had grown dense, turning the lake into a flat, dark sheet that reflected nothing. As my fire crackled and the kettle perched on the stone's edge, I leaned back in my folding chair when I first noticed the lights. Initially, I thought they were another camper's headlamps across the shore, 2 small, bright white dots bobbing slightly, but they didn't move. They remained fixed in place, definitely human-sized and standing upright. The longer I watched, the more certain I became. 2 men in dark suits standing perfectly still where no path or road existed, just beyond the water's edge. I rubbed my eyes, believing they might be fog reflections, but they remained. The wind pushed misty tendrils around their shapes, revealing their rigid, unnatural stillness. I couldn't make out their faces, only their outlined bodies. I tried to ignore them, convincing myself I was imagining things. I poured water into my kettle and stared at the fire, yet couldn't stop stealing glances. They didn't move. They didn't speak. Nothing changed except the mist's increasing thickness. For a moment I thought one might have shifted, but it could have been a trick of the fog. Calling out felt wrong, as if speaking would violate some unspoken rule. What I felt wasn't traditional fear, but an unsettling awareness of being observed. A sense that my presence mattered in a way I couldn't comprehend. Since then, the clicking has changed. It's less random, more structured. Sometimes 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2, exactly like the knock at the door that day. I haven't seen the men again, but when I go out to smoke at night, I sense someone watching from the dark edge of the pasture. No movement, no shapes, just that feeling. The clicking noise has been haunting me. 3 weeks ago they came to the door, but since then, nothing. No letters, no follow-up. Just the persistent question echoing in my mind. Have you heard the clicking noise? The stone farmhouse and fields have been in my family since my grandfather's time. About 15 miles outside Glasgow. Late one October night, with stars smeared behind a misty film and damp evenings settling in, the sheep were unusually restless. Around midnight, I went to check the north field. At the far end of the field, just above the tree line, a glow hovered. Initially, I thought it might be a helicopter or searchlight from a nearby event, but there was no sound, not even the distant hum of a rotor or engine. This wasn't a beam of light either. The glow seemed contained, part of a solid shape that was difficult to define. I've tried to rationalize what I saw. Friends mostly dismissed it as other campers or fog playing tricks, but I know what I experienced. I camp often, usually alone, and I've never seen anyone appear or disappear like this. The way they emerged and vanished, the impossibility of any path or boat bringing them here, none of it makes sense. By 3 a.m., the fog was so thick I could barely see the shoreline. I've started sleeping with earplugs, though they don't help. The clicks seem fainter but closer, like they're inside the room instead of outside. I haven't told Callum or anyone else. How could I even begin to explain? Later, I grabbed my flashlight and swept its beam across the landscape. The men were gone, hidden, completely absent. I stood up, shivering, searching the trees. Nothing. Then I heard it, leaves crunching, faint but steady, emerging from the tree line along the water. 2 figures appeared where no path existed, walking upright and deliberate toward a point hundreds of yards away before vanishing behind another line of trees. Their black silhouettes blended into the night, leaving no trace. I don't know what they were doing or why they were watching me, but I do know one thing. Whatever it was, they had been waiting, and somehow I had stumbled into their observation. No trace remained, no crushed grass, no mud prints, no broken twigs. The ground was completely untouched. As I packed slowly, my mind oscillated between expecting their return and fearing an interruption to my solitude. Driving back to my flat in Glasgow, I constantly checked the rear view mirror. I passed the same stretch of land without seeing anything. By the time I reached the city, the entire experience felt dreamlike, something I was meant to forget or perhaps never truly witnessed. Weeks later, I returned to the location in daylight and retraced my route. The next morning, around 7, I stepped outside to feed the animals. A highland fog draped the ground like a wet cloth. There they were, 2 men in black suits standing at the far edge of my property, just past the stone wall on the rise overlooking the north field. They stood completely still, no weight shifting, no adjusting, no visible breathing, just statues emerging from the fog. Something felt distinctly wrong about their presence. Their stillness was unnatural, especially on this damp hillside. From a distance, I caught glimpses of pale skin, dark hair, and what might have been sunglasses. My gut instinct warned me against calling out. While working with feed buckets, I stole occasional glances. 10 minutes passed, and they remained fixated on the sky, unmoving. At one point, I turned my back to enter the barn for another feed sack. When I returned moments later, they had vanished. No car, no footprints on the damp grass, just an empty hillside and rolling fog. Walking to their previous spot, my heart racing, I noticed the grass was flattened where they had stood. I scanned the fields and the small road running parallel. The shoreline was empty, the trees unchanged. Nothing suggested anyone had been there at all. I never saw the figures again. I haven't seen anyone in a black suit since, and I haven't returned to that campsite at night. But sometimes, driving along the A82 after work, when the light hits the water in a certain way, I catch a shadow or a flicker in the corner of my eye, and I swear I see them standing at the edge of the loch still watching. I tell the story only now because it's been years and it stayed with me, tucked into the back of my mind where I can't quite reach it. Some nights I still picture them out here, black shapes in the fog, patient and motionless, waiting for someone else to notice. Even writing this, I checked the windows, half expecting to see them on the far shore, standing silently, staring back. Something had changed, and I couldn't shake the feeling. My normally fearless dog refused to go near the area, standing at the barn door with his tail down, ignoring my calls and unwilling to cross the fence line. The sheep were unusually quiet, pressed together near the barn like stones, my ears filled with a weird, faint pulsing pressure similar to the sensation just before diving underwater. A mysterious glow appeared and then dimmed, drifting slowly westward before blinking out completely. I scanned the dark sky for another 20 minutes, but nothing returned. Back in the kitchen, I made a note about the time and direction of the event, deciding not to tell anyone. The sheep were tightly clustered, their backs turned away from a spot where two men had previously stood. Throughout the day, I couldn't stop checking that location. When night fell and mist rolled in with the stars, a soft rhythmic pressure returned to my ears like a pulse underwater. The sky was empty. Sheep huddled close to the barn while I watched from inside, lights off, scanning the property's edge for any movement. For 3 consecutive mornings, I checked the field at dawn. No suited men appeared. No unusual glow hovered above the trees, but the sheep remained strange. They'd step into the north field, then quickly back away, bunching together as if an invisible barrier blocked their path. I stopped trying to understand by week's end. I fenced the area off and left it empty. Standing at the field's edge felt like walking into air slightly heavier than normal. A quiet pressure seemed to press against my skin. I never saw those men again. I still don't know how they arrived or where they went. I've encountered strangers on my land before, lost hikers, surveyors, kids on bikes, but nothing like this. Nothing comparable to 2 silent men in black suits staring at the sky through the mist. Nothing that could leave an entire field feeling so fundamentally wrong for days afterward. Now, whenever I step outside at night, I catch myself looking toward that routine, half expecting a strange glow to return, half expecting those 2 figures to reappear, not looking at me, but watching something else entirely. It was late November, with one of those cold, damp nights where tarmac and chimney smoke hung heavy in the air. We'd spent the entire evening unpacking boxes in Claire's newly rented small terrace house on Dundee's outskirts, finishing well after midnight. Stepping outside for some air, we found ourselves on a typical residential street, a short road ending abruptly, lined with old brick houses and narrow pavements. A single orange street light marked the corner. The silence was unusual. Normally distant car sounds or a barking dog would break the quiet, but not this night. Everything felt unnaturally still. The night sky surrounded us, dark and heavy. Above the rooftops not far overhead, a triangular shape hung suspended. Claire lit her cigarette and motioned for me to look up. A white object marked with 3 corner points caught our attention. A faint red glow pulsed in its center. It wasn't massive, but close enough for us to make out its darker edges against the darkness. The thing just hung there, completely motionless. We found ourselves whispering. Claire tried to capture it on her phone, but the screen remained stubbornly black, refusing to record anything. After 2 attempts, she gave up. We watched intently as the red center pulsed once, and then the corner lights blinked in sequence. 1, 2, 3, like stage running lights. This happened twice before everything went completely dark. No dramatic departure, no sudden movement. It simply vanished. We stood shivering, staring at the empty sky until Claire murmured, "Let's go inside." That night, sleep eluded us both. We told no one. Not neighbors, not family. We barely discussed it between ourselves. A week later, at the bus stop on the high street around 6 p.m., with the pavement slick from earlier drizzle, a man approached. Neat and clean-shaven, he wore a black overcoat with a black suit, white shirt, and black tie. He seemed unbothered by the cold. Without greeting or small talk, he stopped near us and looked directly at Claire, then at me. His question was precise. Did the lights blink in sequence? I hesitated, processing his words. Claire started to respond, but before she could, he turned and walked away. Not hurriedly, just calmly strolling back from where he'd come, shoes clicking on the wet pavement. He never looked back. We sat frozen. The bus came and went. When we finally spoke, Claire's only words were, "How did he know?" Strange things started happening. A black car sat at the street's end one evening when I left Claire's place. Its engine was off, windows tinted, the driver's silhouette barely visible. As I got closer, the car began moving slowly, as if it had been waiting. Nights brought unexplained events. Claire's landline would ring. but only silence answered. Faint clicking sounds whispered through the receiver, like an old tape recorder struggling to communicate something unknown. One evening, I woke on her sofa and caught a glimpse of white light filtering through, driving home from a friend's place near Stirling. Thin mist covered the hills with my headlights cutting through the fog. Still shaken from recent to avoid a deer, I was cautious. Between the village and city outskirts, something unusual caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a shadow or fallen branch. Then it moved, crossing the road slowly, deliberately, without a sound. A black shape glided low, its edges absorbing my headlights differently from any normal object. I instinctively slammed the brakes, heart racing. This wasn't like an animal. Instead, it smoothly traversed the road and disappeared into the mist. Sitting frozen, I questioned my perception. Who would believe such a story? I told no one, not friends, not my partner. I continued driving home, taking each mile carefully, repeatedly checking the rearview mirror. Weeks later, at our usual bus stop, I spotted a tall figure at the street's end. Dressed in a black coat, hands tucked into pockets, he remained motionless under a street lamp. When a passing bus momentarily blocked my view, he disappeared without a trace. Theories raced through my mind. Was it a new type of drone? Had someone overheard our conversation? Nothing made sense. We'd been completely alone during the craft's appearance, and we hadn't told a soul. Claire swore she'd mentioned nothing to anyone. By January, Claire moved closer to the city centre. The mysterious car stopped appearing, and the phone calls ceased. No explanation ever emerged. Now, waiting for buses at night, I can't help scanning my surroundings. I half expect a man in a black suit to approach with a question I'll never understand. The mist crept along the streets outside as I tried to settle in for a late dinner. The radiator hummed, and I had just sat down when a slow, deliberate knock interrupted the silence. No, something strange was happening, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It started subtly with two men who appeared out of nowhere, studying me intently without explanation. They were dressed identically in black suits, white shirts, and polished shoes that caught the hallway light. When they spoke, it was with an unsettling evenness. "Good evening. Is your vehicle still functioning?" Their sudden vanishing into the fog left me unsettled. No sound marked their departure. They simply disappeared. When I pulled back the curtains later, the street stood empty. The triangular craft had vanished, and we never saw it again. The weeks that followed were increasingly bizarre. Streetlights flickered unpredictably. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, always just beyond clear sight. Distant car engines would start and then vanish when I tried to. Dark figures seemed to move behind the mist at the street's edge, dissolving whenever I attempted to investigate. A deep vibration burrowed into my chest, signaling something was watching. This feeling extended far beyond my flat. During my commute, black cars with deeply tinted windows began appearing in strange locations. Older sedans, always present yet seemingly empty. Nights became a ritual of multiple door locks and repeated window checks. The sensation of being observed grew heavier, more persistent. Late autumn had settled in with radiators clicking through the nights. Weeks earlier, walking home from the pub across the park near the canal, I'd seen something unusual. A line of lights hanging low, moving slowly. No aircraft I recognized, too quiet, too close. I started logging these odd experiences on my phone, tracking each unusual moment. Strangely, I'd sometimes find entries I didn't remember writing. Notes in my own handwriting described times and places I wasn't certain I'd been. Was I sleepwalking, dozing off while driving? No accidents or bruises marked these strange times, just a persistent sense of disorientation. My unease wasn't mere paranoia. Something was happening, though I couldn't explain what. No, a bizarre encounter unfolded 3 nights after my radio conversation with Graham. Just after 10 p.m., an unexpected visitor arrived. Standing at my doorway was a towering stranger, easily 6'2", dressed in a black suit with a white shirt buttoned to the neck, no tie. His appearance was striking. Pale skin, a narrow face, and dark hair combed flat marked him as unusual. He looked to be in his early 40s, though pinpointing his exact age proved difficult. What truly unsettled me were his eyes, not their color, but how unnaturally he held them fixed on me, unblinking, as if he were trying to understand human eye contact but couldn't quite manage it. "Mr. Hawker," he said, I nodded. No introduction, no handshake. He simply stood there until I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, each step calculated and measured. Inside my living room, he saw books, a half-empty water glass, a pile of unopened mail. Nothing escaped his scrutiny. Then, with an eerie calmness, he turned to me. You described lights in the sky. I want to know about the sound patterns you noticed. Days earlier, I'd witnessed something unusual. 6 or 7 white lights moving silently between fog and headlights, like something from another world. I slammed the brakes, and it vanished without a trace. One foggy grocery trip particularly unnerved me. The mist hugged the road, thick and obscuring. Suddenly, the same low black shape crossed my path again. This caught me completely off guard. I hadn't mentioned any sounds to anyone. Not on the radio, not to Graham, not to a single person. The entire experience had been remarkably silent. I explained this, emphasizing the event's quietness, but he seemed skeptical, tilting his head as if I weren't telling the whole truth. That night, sleeplessness consumed me. I stared at my car in the driveway, barely visible in the dim streetlight, feeling as if someone were watching, checking if I still worked. Every house, creak and wind gust felt like a warning. I started driving less at night, avoiding certain roads, keeping windows closed. The spheres drifted silently in the sky, connected by an invisible network. Lowing softly, they hovered briefly before tilting and sliding behind clouds without leaving any trace. Their sudden appearance and vanishing left an unsettling impression. When I shared the complete silence with the stranger, he responded with an unnerving intensity. With stiff, almost mechanical movements, he sat in my armchair as if carefully rehearsing human behavior. Other people around us seemed natural, but he stood out with his calculated precision. His line of questioning was meticulous and relentless. He demanded intricate details about the lights, constantly interrupting my explanations with precise inquiries. Were the lights pulsing sequentially? Did they overlap? Were their brightness levels changing in cycles? His exact terminology, pulses, and cycles began to make me uncomfortable. While not threatening, his laser-focused attention on minute details I barely registered felt deeply unsettling. Unexpectedly, he asked about unusual dreams following the sighting. I denied experiencing anything strange, though the reality was more nuanced. Truthfully, I'd been waking suddenly at night, sitting upright with a racing heart, unable to remember my dreams. This detail remained unshared. The men in black never returned after that encounter. No knocking, no surveillance. The dark figure didn't reappear, at least not within my view. Yet the memory persists, especially late at night when I scan the driveway or watch mist rolling over distant hills. A weight lingers, as if someone is methodically checking everything remains in order. Deep down, I understood their questions about my vehicle were never truly about the car itself. After roughly 20 minutes, he stood abruptly. No farewell, no gratitude. His parting words were cryptic. If you notice the sounds, you will know what they mean. He opened the door and walked into the hallway. I followed, more to confirm his departure. He descended the stairs with mechanical precision. Leaning over the railing, I expected to hear the front door, but only silence followed. After waiting a minute, I went downstairs. The entryway was empty, the street quiet with just one car parked under a street lamp. No trace of him remained. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind kept circling back to our earlier conversation, especially his cryptic remarks about sound patterns. Something felt wrong. He seemed to know more than he was letting on. With each passing moment, I grew more suspicious. Was there an unheard sound that night? Was he intentionally manipulating my thoughts? Working nights at St. Cuthbert's, a small regional hospital outside Manchester, was typically uneventful. Our facility usually treated older patients with routine emergencies like falls and respiratory problems. Everything changed around 1:30 in the morning when paramedics brought in Alan Webster, a lean man in his late 30s. Webster arrived wearing muddy boots and a jacket smelling of wood smoke. He had collapsed in a field after calling emergency services while walking his dog. His vital signs were stable, but something was clearly off. Pale and trembling, he kept repeating strange phrases. I was right above me. I couldn't move. The lights were everywhere. The paramedic brushed off his claims, muttering about late-night television. We admitted him overnight for observation. As I settled him in, he continually tried to sit up, craning his neck toward the window as if expecting something to still be present. His dog had vanished and hadn't returned. When I questioned him, he described a silent disk of light circling over the terrain. No sound at all, he stressed. His speech was slurred. He explained blacking out when something moved overhead and momentarily losing sensation in his hands. As a nurse, I clinically logged these details, though part of me suspected stress or dehydration might explain his unusual account. Earlier that evening, while brushing my teeth with the bathroom window slightly open, I'd heard a low Donalpy steady hum. Initially, I thought it was the boiler or distant traffic, but something was different. The sound was deeper, more consistent, almost like standing next to an electric transformer, except it was coming from outside. I turned off the tap and stood listening. The hum continued for about a minute before disappearing completely. I rushed to the window, scanning the street below. Nothing seemed out of place, just the same cars, the same empty pavement. Around 3 a.m., something strange happened during my shift to the nurse's station. 2 men in black suits entered the ward, moving with an unsettling precision, their steps synchronized, no wasted motion. One was shorter, bald, with pale skin. The other stood taller, dark-haired, looking to be in his early 40s. Their arrival was unusual. Hospital entrances were supposed to be locked at this hour, requiring visitors to buzz the front desk. They approached directly, and in a completely flat tone, the shorter man asked about Mr. Alan Webster. The strangers watched me intently. Something felt off about them. The taller one's accent suggested he'd learned English phonetically. When they demanded to see specific patients, their tone made my stomach churn. Against my better judgment, I provided the room number but said I'd check with the charge nurse first. They didn't wait. Walking past me in perfect synchronization, their footsteps echoed down the hallway. By the time I reached Alan's room, the door was closed. Through the glass, I saw them flanking his bed. Alan was awake, his eyes darting between them, mouth moving rapidly. One man held a notepad but wasn't writing. When I tapped the door, only Alan turned, giving me a terrified glance before the taller man leaned in and said something, making Alan's face go blank. 10 minutes later, they emerged. I tried to ask for identification, but the taller man simply stated, "He has been discharged." No paperwork, no consultation. I rushed into the room. Alan was gone. His bed was empty, sheets pulled back. His clothes and boots had vanished too. I searched everywhere, spinning around to chase them. The corridor was empty. I raced to the stairwell and lobby. Nothing. Security confirmed no one had entered through the front doors in the last half hour. By morning, things got worse. Alan's admission record had disappeared from the system. No file, no wristband. When I inquired, they claimed the patient number I mentioned didn't exist. The paramedics who brought him in denied transporting anyone by that name. I checked the incident book myself. The entry I'd written at 1:45 a.m. for Alan Webster had vanished. The sun had dropped behind the hills when I was out on Lacanic that August evening. Water black with small ripples caught the last glints of light in a clear sky. Something felt off about Alan Webster's case at the hospital, and my shift had been increasingly strange. When I asked other nurses about Alan, most dismissed my concerns. Only Claire, a night aide, quietly shared what she'd witnessed. 2 men leaving his room with Alan walking unsteadily between them, almost like he was sleepwalking. We checked the ward corridor's CCTV, but found a strange 15-minute gap in the footage. No discharge was ever filed. Strange occurrences started mounting. The stairwell light would flicker when I was alone. Automatic front doors would mysteriously open around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. One morning, a black sedan with tinted windows idled across the street, slowly driving away, without headlights when I turned to look. After his unofficial discharge, I never saw Alan Webster again. Fishing was my usual routine, a simple hope of catching a couple of trout for dinner. That morning, something unusual caught my attention near the far side of the dock. The water moved in an inexplicable way, not from wind or fish, but something deeper. A soft glow appeared beneath the surface, shifting slowly as if following a precise pattern. At first I thought it might be an optical illusion or distant lighthouse reflection, but there was nothing out there. The glow continued moving in almost perfect arcs, sometimes disappearing, sometimes reappearing a few feet over. I found myself staring, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. I told no one, not my fishing neighbor, not a soul. It was one of those experiences you mentally file away, unsure if it even happened. The next morning, while cleaning my nets early at the dock, I spotted a black car parked at the far end, an old 90s model sedan with tinted windows. Two men in identical black suits approached. Crisp white shirts, black ties, polished shoes. Their walk was purposeful, without friendly gestures. The air felt heavy as they drew near, and I froze mid-motion. The taller one spoke first, his voice calm and almost emotionless. The night was different back then, a darkness rare in today's world. Late September, about 10 years ago, I lived in a small village outside of Inverryian. Farmland surrounded us, with maybe 2 shops and a pub. Stars stretched uninterrupted across clear night skies, and street lights barely extended beyond the main road. Just after 11, I was walking home from a friend's house. The early autumn air had a sharp bite, and fields were heavy with the smell of cut silage. My torch low, I watched the dirt path to avoid tripping on ruts. When I finally looked up, something caught my eye. Above the tree line, a shape was blocking part of the stars. At first I thought it was a cloud, but it was too precise. 3 straight edges forming a perfect triangle. I stopped walking and just stood there. The object moved slowly, silently, gliding without a sound. No engine noise, not even the rustle of branches you might hear from a low-flying plane. 3 white lights, steady and unblinking, outlined the edges. It passed directly overhead in about 20 seconds before continuing. Later, they approached me. "How many times have you seen the move?" I blinked, confused. "Movement?" The man nodded sharply, clarifying about the underwater phenomenon. I was stunned. No one knew what I'd witnessed. Not my neighbors, not my friends, no one. Yet here they were, asking about something I hadn't discussed with a single person. "I don't understand," I said quietly. The shorter man stepped forward, his ash-grey eyes fixed on me steadily. "I only saw it once," I admitted, feeling uneasy even saying those words. A quick glance passed between them. Something unreadable crossed their expressions. Confusion, disbelief, or something else entirely. They said nothing more, simply turning and walking back to their car with an unnatural precision that didn't seem quite human. I watched them get in, noticing they didn't fully open doors before sitting. The car made no sound, sliding into the gravel like part of the morning mist, then vanishing as if it had never existed. The rest of the day, I tried to shake off the encounter. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the tension of being alone had played tricks on my mind. But when I checked the ground later, there were no footprints. The gravel remained undisturbed, no tire tracks visible. Everything was clean, untouched. No theft became an unsettling experience. Something felt different, quieter, heavier, as if the area was holding its breath. I'd keep my distance now, never venturing close to that specific spot. The morning started like any other, with damp streets after an earlier rain and a sky washed clean. Walking down the lane near the old church, I suddenly encountered a man who appeared from around the corner. His appearance was striking, tall, dressed in a black suit, white shirt, and thin black tie and outfit rarely seen in our village outside of Sunday service or a funeral. He stood directly in my path, his presence unnerving. Pale skin, dark eyes, and an unsettling stillness that defied normal human movement. No twitching, no blinking, just absolute motionlessness. "Did the craft rotate?" he asked in a calm yet peculiar voice. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone what I'd seen, hadn't even used the word craft in my own thoughts. When I asked him to explain, he repeated the question exactly. I responded that it hadn't, that it had simply glided flat. The moment I spoke, I realized I'd revealed too much, confirming I'd witnessed something. He nodded once, as if verifying information, then turned and walked away down the narrow street. Bewildered, I followed, feeling the encounter was too bizarre to let go. But when I turned the corner, the lane was completely empty. I walked to the end, emerging toward the hills and blending back into the darkness. That evening, I returned to the dock. The water's surface was smooth, black, quiet, yet I felt watched, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I packed up early and walked back to my small cabin on the hill, scanning the tree line constantly. I saw no one, but kept looking, half expecting to catch a glimpse of a suit or a watcher's reflection. Later, two men approached me about the incident. They asked about the movement with a precise, methodical manner, exchanging looks that suggested they were checking against some hidden record. I haven't told anyone what happened. There's no proof, just the memory of two men who knew something I never said, who disappeared like they were never real. The nights afterward, shadows near the dock's edge seemed to watch me, a constant reminder of that strange, unexplained visit. And some nights I stand at the hill's edge, watching the loch and letting memories settle like still water. When the wind is right and darkness falls, a part of me anticipates their return, yet another part hopes they won't. I remain quiet, uncertain. The story begins with a camping trip. Laura and I plan to test her new gear before autumn. Late August offered warm days but cool nights that demanded good sleeping bags. We found a secluded spot off a forestry track on the north side. A flat ground near water with an unobstructed view, a distant farmhouse with faint lights, was the only sign of human presence. The silence was absolute. Every water ripple and branch movement seemed amplified. After dinner, we sat by the water's edge, listening intently. Around 11 o'clock, with darkness fully settled, Laura noticed something extraordinary. What we witnessed defied explanation. What first appeared as a star reflection began moving slowly and deliberately. A pale yellow sphere, lantern-sized, hovered about 100 feet above the water surface. More appeared, first one then another, then a third. They maintained perfect spacing and behaved unlike any typical lights. No blinking like aircraft, no beams like torches. They simply glowed with a strange pulsing quality that made the water beneath them shimmer. We sat motionless, watching the spheres drift silently across the loch. At one point, they lowered closer to the surface, creating a perfect mirror image. 3 spheres above, 3 reflected below, moving in unison. After perhaps 15 minutes, they rose higher, faded, and vanished without trail or sound. I've kept this encounter to myself, not even telling my wife. The experience seemed too strange, too unreal to share. In the week following, small disturbances began to unsettle me. My normally calm dog barked at the back garden gate 3 consecutive nights, always around 2 a.m. each time I investigated. The lane was empty. Once, I thought I glimpsed a dark car, black or grey, idling at the field's edge near our house, its lights off. The night was etched in my memory, a moment defined by a stranger's intense interest in rotation, as if I held some crucial secret. I stood in an open field, scanning hedges and listening intently for any sound. Crows perched on telephone wires, and the wet earth released its earthy scent. No footsteps, no signs of movement. No explanation for how he could have vanished so completely. My drive home with Marissa that cool October evening had started ordinarily enough. We were returning from her sister's place in Oak Ridge, traveling along dark back roads, lined with trees and occasional pastures. Midway through our journey, near some farmland, Marissa spotted something unusual. A cluster of lights hovered low above a row of trees, a couple 100 yards off the road. Initially, I thought it might be a plane, but something felt different. These weren't typical aircraft lights. 3 white lights and 1 red, arranged in a perfect diamond shape, glowed steadily and unnaturally still. We stopped on the shoulder, watching the object hang motionless and completely silent. Later that night, I tried rationalizing the experience. Perhaps it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was simply passing through. But the phrase, "Did the craft rotate?" kept echoing in my mind. Until that moment, I hadn't fully considered what I saw as a craft. Even now, I can't precisely explain what happened. The next morning, while unzipping the tent, I noticed 2 men standing nearby. Their appearance was surreal, dark suits, black ties, and white shirts that seemed bizarrely out of place. Their attire was creased but dry, as if they hadn't traveled through the big surrounding terrain. They approached silently without introduction. Something moved through the trees, marked only by occasional fish splashes and wind. Heather broke the silence. 9. Later that day, something caught Laura's attention. The sheep in the nearby field were clustered tightly on one side, pressed against the fence, as if desperately trying to distance themselves from something. Our drive home was quiet. We tried to discuss the encounter but felt an unspoken tension, like talking too much might somehow make things worse. I started by remembering what we'd seen in the sky, something entirely unlike a helicopter. No rotor sound, no air vibration, the lights moved slowly, almost rotating before drifting sideways parallel to the road. We watched for about 2 minutes before it suddenly rose up unnaturally fast and vanished without a sound. The encounter with the strange men happened first. A tall man with short dark hair asked us about a hum. I went completely still. We hadn't told anyone about what we'd seen, not even Laura's brother who knew our camping location. Laura woke up behind me, rubbing her eyes and asking what he meant. The second man, with lighter hair and no expression, repeated the question about the hum. We denied hearing anything. They exchanged a quick glance, seemingly confirming something between themselves. Then the tall one simply said, "Thank you," and they walked back up the forestry track without another word. We sat stunned. I didn't think to follow them until they had disappeared. When I finally went up the track, it was empty. No car sounds, no footprints, nothing. Driving home felt strange. We kept glancing out the windows, as if expecting something to return. I couldn't stop trying to make sense of what we'd seen, but nothing about it felt ordinary. When we turned onto our street, our headlights swept across the front yard, revealing 2 men standing at our door, tall, thin, dressed in dark suits. Their skin looked pale, almost grey in the harsh light. They didn't turn when our car approached, which seemed odd. Most people would. Instead, they remained motionless, facing our front door like they'd been waiting. Marissa grabbed my arm. "Who are they?" she whispered. I pulled into the driveway slowly, my mind struggling to process everything. We hadn't told anyone about what we just experienced. We hadn't even discussed it with each other. Yet somehow, these 2 men were already here. I never saw that strangely dressed man again. He didn't return to the village, and no one else mentioned noticing such a stranger. We never camped there again. George's, a late July evening with cool Atlantic salt air and a pale blue sky. Earlier, I'd been filming gulls and waves on the eastern cliffs when I spotted strange lights low over the water about half a mile offshore. 3 white lights with a green tinge drifted together as if connected. At first, I thought they might be helicopters, but there was no sound. As I watched, they shifted oddly, splitting apart and reforming into a triangle. I filmed until the image became grainy, and then suddenly all lights vanished. Near the rear cabin window, 2 men caught my attention. They were identically dressed in dark suits, white shirts, and black ties, an unusual outfit for a summer ferry ride. Their hats sat neatly beside them. While other passengers scrolled phones or shifted in their seats, these men just stared out at the ocean, completely motionless. Something about them felt off. Before we could exit the car, both men turned in perfect sync and started walking toward us. Their movements were stiff but deliberate, as if mimicking human walking. I rolled down the window halfway. One leaned in, his eyes impossibly dark, his expression unchanging. In a flat mechanical voice, he asked, "Did you see it land?" Marissa quietly answered, "No." The man stared at her, then straightened up. He glanced at his companion, who remained silent. Without another word, they turned and walked down the driveway. Not hurried, not slow, just steady. I thought they might have a car nearby, but when they reached the street's edge, they didn't cross the road or head toward any vehicle. They simply continued walking side by side until darkness consumed them beyond the streetlight. We sat in the car for a long time, silent. When we left, I looked around, expecting to see them in the yard, but it was empty. That night, sleep was elusive. Every tiny sound outside made us alert and listening. Around 3 a.m., I got up and checked the locks again. Nothing was disturbed, but the air felt heavy, like we weren't alone. The next day, I asked neighbors about any suspicious activity. No one had seen anything. I even drove up and down the street, searching for any parked cars, but found nothing. What haunts me is the specificity of their presence. Not returning from the restroom, I slowed near their table an hour into the trip. Their appearance was unsettling, identical in every way. All pale, with dark hair perfectly combed back, their skin looked unnaturally smooth, almost airbrushed. The shorter one had long, thin fingers folded motionlessly on the table. As I walked past, neither of them blinked. I sat a few rows behind, stealing glances throughout the crossing. The taller one turned just enough for me to see his profile. His jaw barely moved, but I could have sworn his lips formed a silent word. His companion tilted his head slightly, as if listening. Their departure, with no car, no sound, no trace, still defies explanation. Late in autumn, grey skies, and a constant damp chill surrounded my family's farm outside Stirlingshire. Sheep and barley were my daily companions. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet and mine. That Wednesday, just after dusk, something unusual caught my eye. At first, I thought it was moonlight, but something felt different. 3 distinct lights hung in a tight triangle above the field, shifting almost lazily while maintaining a perfect formation. No sound, no engine noise, just an eerie glow moving silently overhead. For about 10 minutes, I stood frozen. Then suddenly, the lights rose in unison and shot upward, vanishing into the low clouds without a trace. Sleep that night was impossible. I kept turning the experience over in my mind, searching for a rational explanation. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was probably a military exercise. I called the nearby RF base and reported what I'd seen. The man who answered was polite but seemed uninterested, simply noting the time and location before saying, "Thank you, sir," and ending the call. The next afternoon, around 3 o'clock, I was splitting wood in the yard when an old, polished black car came down the lane. 2 men stepped out, tall, wearing dark suits and hats that looked too sharp and clean for our rural setting. They were unusual, pale beyond normal, almost as if they'd never seen sunlight. Their faces were smooth, almost waxy, and they blinked far less than seemed natural. The taller one spoke first with an accent I couldn't place. "We'd like to see where you keep." I wasn't a casual inquiry. "Did you see it land?" Almost as if they knew exactly what we'd witnessed and just needed to verify the final details. The street looked typical that Tuesday in October, cars parked nose to curb, Mrs. in purplish. Ortega's dog tied to the post, kids' bikes leaning against steps. I was walking home after missing the bus following a longer-than-expected algebra test on a cold day that didn't bite but made your skin feel tight. I had my headphones in for 20 seconds before taking them out. I'm weird about hearing the world when I walk alone. At first, it was just a light on the power lines near the old water tower. One bulb that thinks it's a spotlight. But the shape wasn't sitting on the pole. It hung in the air about 20 feet above the sidewalk, right past the library steps. A pale circle like a paper plate with a glow on it. No halo, no beam, just that soft, steady disc. I stopped. My hands were in my hoodie pockets. My breath made small clouds. The light didn't flicker. I didn't hum. The leaves above me didn't move when it slid a little to the left. I followed the street, and it followed me. When I crossed at the crosswalk, it crossed too, keeping the same distance, as if paired with me like a shadow. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's what happened. A week earlier, something strange had occurred on the farm. Men had appeared near the fence, gripping the wood. "These are your sheep," one of them said. Not as a request, but a statement. Something about their silent, waiting presence made me uneasy, but I didn't feel I could refuse. I led them across the yard through the gate toward the south paddock, where most of the flock was grazing. They followed quietly, their shoes making almost no sound on the gravel. Later, at the ferry dock, these same 2 men appeared again. Strangely, no one else seemed to notice them. A woman with 2 kids walked right by to get snacks, not even looking in their direction. When the ferry horn sounded, both men straightened simultaneously like soldiers coming to attention. After disembarking, I looked back. Their table was empty, their hats gone. I pretended to tie my shoe on the pier. I watched other passengers, fishermen, teenagers with bikes, couples, but saw no sign of those 2 men. When the last car drove off, I walked back and checked through the ferry windows. The booth remained empty. No one was on deck. I still have the grainy, shaky phone footage of the light. I've watched it countless times trying to understand what I saw, but I can't shake the image of those 2 men suddenly appearing and disappearing, staring at the same ocean where strange lights had been. The shorter man leaned on a fence post, staring intently at the sheep. The taller one turned to me and said, "This is all of them." "Most," I answered quietly. They nodded in perfect sync, a movement that twisted my stomach. Without another word, they walked back to their car. By the time I caught up, they were already inside. The engine purred softly as they drove up the lane, never glancing my way. Something was different with the sheep that evening. Every night since, they'd behaved the same way. Normally, they'd crowd the south paddock until I guided them toward the sheds. But now, they refused to go near it. They clustered by the gate, bleeding, stamping their hooves, resisting all my attempts to move them. I herded them into the smaller east field instead. I thought it was just animals being strange, but it kept happening. After a week, I walked to the field to investigate. The grass looked completely normal. No scorch marks, no broken fences, just the same pasture I'd tended for years. Yet standing there, I felt a strange heaviness, as if the air itself pressed down on me. I couldn't explain it better than that. They avoided the south paddock completely, almost like something was wrong with it. During the day, they'd huddle at the far edge if they wandered in at all. The men never returned. The strange lights disappeared. But the sheep still won't settle in that field. It's like they know something I don't. Night changed everything. I walked past the sidewalk near Mr. Presser, near Mr. Dell Levin's garage. The light was strange. I drifted closer like a weird drone, moving forward without looking back much. TJ from my homeroom didn't even glance up as I passed. The light moved through fog, seemingly guided by something invisible. I thought about taking a picture, but my phone was cluttered with messy text messages. Even if I tried, I wouldn't have captured anything. When the cul-de-sac hits the hill, my neighborhood opens to a line of trees and houses. Suddenly, the light shot ahead. Not a burst, just a quick motion. That panic feeling hit me, like when you're 10 and think you forgot to lock the shed. My dad would understand. I jogged the rest of the way home, not looking back until I was almost inside. Claire from across the street heard me and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine and closed the door. I got home and locked the door, flipping the porch light on. My mom was in the kitchen drying dishes. She gave me that smile moms get when kids say something weird but insist it's serious. "You got home safe?" she asked. I said good. I didn't tell her about the shape. I just mentioned a light and left the rest out because it sounded silly, like something from a movie. Mom didn't press me. She had the oven on and a work call coming up. My brother called from college with some story about a friend catching a bus. Early the next morning, I went to school before classes started. The front steps were wet from overnight fog. By the flagpole stood two men who looked like they'd stepped out of a movie about government secrets. Dark suits, dark ties, shoes so polished they reflected the concrete. No badges, just waiting. One of them spotted me and tilted his head as if I was exactly who he expected. He walked over with his companion, stopping about 3 feet away. Two men approached me at school. They didn't seem particularly remarkable. One had a small cheek scar, both faintly smelling of hospital lemon cleaner. Instinctively, I offered a polite, "Can I help you?" The taller man asked about a sphere that had followed me the previous night. When I repeated sphere, I realized I'd only mentioned a light before. My tongue felt thick. People always say to be honest, but something about that moment made honesty feel dangerous. The shorter man watched me intently, never writing anything down. His attention was an unsettling blend of boredom and intensity that made my skin crawl. He wanted specifics about the object's motion, color, and any electronic interference. Though I could have lied or walked away, curiosity kept me talking. I explained how it followed me from the library, pale with a bluish tint, moving slowly before quickly sliding to the curb. My phone had gone fuzzy when I tried to photograph it. I kept my racing thoughts and underlying anxiety to myself. They exchanged a glance that seemed to communicate something unspoken. The taller man instructed me to continue my normal routine, avoid discussing the observation, and report any physiological symptoms. When I asked who to report to, he vaguely suggested the school nurse or police, then cryptically added that I should maintain distance. As quickly as they arrived, they left. No one at school appeared to notice. The janitor kept sweeping. Miss Patel moved through her standard morning routine. Their interaction felt like an invisible errand conducted in plain sight. I kept my observations to myself during a day of routine maintenance, answering questions, taking notes, returning worksheets. Everything seemed slightly altered. Hallway lights felt different, fluorescent hums more pronounced. At lunch, when TJ asked about a traffic accident, I stayed quiet. Something felt off after the translator error in the feed. By the time the bell rang, my head buzzed with scattered thoughts. That night, sleep eluded me. I wandered to the corner, hands in my pockets, staring at the darkened sky. Asphalt and grilled meat hung in the air. No lights, No disturbance. Gus, Ortega's dog, trotted by with his owner, giving me a look that suggested I should be indoors after dark. I returned home, leaving the porch light on. Small background noises started feeling significant in the days following their visit. My phone's alarm blinked oddly. Correcting itself a minute early, the school security camera facing the hallway seemed to flicker differently. A strange morning unfolded in the parking lot, with the recording capturing 2 frames of pure static before resuming. Maya, my friend, seemed to forget that I had mentioned old Mr. Harov multiple times that morning. Reality felt like it was slipping away, with facts losing their grip. A rainy Thursday arrived, and I was called to the office, anticipating trouble. 2 men sat in folding chairs, with the taller one wearing a thin smile. The principal claimed they were simply checking on my well-being, asking about headaches, sleep, and dizziness. I admitted feeling tired and jumpy, silently keeping the details of my night to myself while my hands trembled, reaching for a pen. They didn't ask about my phone or walking route, just gave a brief nod before leaving. I tried to maintain normalcy afterward. Errands for mom, homework, soccer practice, everything seemed routine, yet the incident kept flickering through my thoughts. On the 3rd night, a car door sound woke me, accompanied by an unsettling sense of being watched. The porch light was on, but no one was here when I checked. The next morning felt eerily silent, as if the morning bird chorus had been stolen away. I never saw those men again, at least not in person. Twice, though, I spotted a black sedan. The end of August was hot, even after dark. As a freelance photographer, I had been shooting barns for a client earlier that day. Driving back along County Road 14, I pulled onto the gravel shoulder near a cornfield. Thick, dark stalks towered above me in the humid air. They weren't moving like typical aircraft. Instead, they hovered, shifted slightly, then realigned. I parked and killed the headlights. The sky glowed a dull orange from distant town lights, with a few stars peeking through. My camera went up on the hood, and I started taking shots at different exposures. Through the viewfinder, the lights looked sharper, almost brighter than to my naked eye. About a dozen photos later, something strange happened. At one point, the lights faded, then reappeared in a completely different position. Insects chirped in the background, the only sound breaking the silence. A stationary something in the distance on the bypass caught my eye, where a driver wouldn't normally sit. I kept these details to myself, telling my brother only that I'd seen something weird. The aftermath wasn't about being heroic or proving anything. Ordinary things suddenly gained new meaning. My phone's camera became a small comfort, not for evidence, but for a sense of security. Walking home felt different. Hands instinctively checked pockets. A blinking light at a crosswalk would trigger momentary panic that quickly faded. Seasons changed. Classes continued. The first night's events seemed to disappear. No follow-up, no mysterious phone calls, no letters arrived. The school maintained its routine. The janitor kept sweeping. My camera continued capturing mediocre sky photos. The strange part wasn't a dramatic moment. It was the subtle details that lingered afterward, a neutrally asked question that felt loaded. A blank security file frame, a neighbor's dog that didn't sound quite right anymore. These small irregularities made me watch the sky longer than usual. Now I lock the door twice each night, a habit I've maintained. Power lines hummed softly along the road. Something felt off, but not threatening, just peculiar. 15 minutes of unsettling evening stillness passed before the lights blinked out completely. As I decided to head home, they appeared. 2 men stood by my car's trunk. Their appearance was meticulously uniform. Black suits, crisp white shirts, perfectly knotted black ties. The suits seemed heavy, like winter funeral attire, yet neither man seemed affected by the heat. Tall and precise. One towered over me by at least half a foot, the other slightly shorter. Their black shoes remained spotless despite the dusty ground. I hadn't heard them approach. One moment I was adjusting camera settings, the next they were simply here. I was working my usual shift at the local feed store. Just another quiet day in our small upstate New York farming town. Late November had settled in, bringing those early evenings where a cold drizzle seems to soak everything. 2 nights before, while stacking wood behind my house, I'd seen something strange. 3 dull orange lights moved slowly in a perfect triangle formation, hanging overhead in complete silence before shooting east faster than anything I'd ever witnessed. I told no one, not neighbors, not co-workers, not even taking out my phone. That Friday night I was watching TV with my dog when 3 deliberate, measured knocks interrupted the silence. Out here, nobody drops by without calling first. When I opened the door, a tall, pale man in a black suit stood on my porch, white shirt, black tie, and polished dress shoes that seemed too formal for a muddy farm road. He didn't smile or introduce himself. Later, 2 men approached me, their demeanor unsettling. "Evening, ma'am," the taller one said in a low, controlled voice, barely audible. "We'd like to see the camera you used." When I gripped the camera tightly and asked who they were, they remained silent. The shorter man repeated the exact same line, as if reading from a script. Their delivery felt mechanical, no accent, no emotion. They stared at me for 5 full seconds after I questioned them. Their faces were pale but not sickly, unnaturally smooth, making their age impossible to determine. Dark hair, identical expressions, with barely moving lips. The taller one finally spoke. I stepped back toward the driver's door, determined not to give up my camera. They smiled simultaneously, but it wasn't natural, more like a rehearsed imitation. The same small upturn at the corners, the same flash of perfectly even teeth. Without another word, they turned and walked down the road. No car, no flashlight, just black suits and pale faces dissolving into the humid darkness. Gravel crunched briefly under their shoes, then stopped. When I looked up, they had vanished. The empty road stretched long with nowhere to have disappeared. Shaking, I got in the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands trembled so much I dropped the camera on the passenger seat. Driving back toward town, the radio dissolved into static for about a mile. Later, things went back to normal. I arrived home and loaded the photos onto my laptop. At first, the images seemed ordinary, just dim cornfield shapes and faint glows where lights had been. But something shifted halfway through the sequence. Between the rows, 2 men in black suits stood facing the camera. They were blurry, yet unmistakable. I hadn't seen anyone while shooting, and the next shots showed only empty cornrows. Days passed in silence. Then, my phone buzzed at the grocery store. An unknown number sent a photo of the same cornfield, zoomed in on their faces. No message, no caption. Something felt off when I got home. The camera battery was dead, though it had been full before. The memory card was missing, and I knew I hadn't removed it. Since then, I've replaced my locks. I still go out on shoots, but never alone and never near that cornfield. He arrived without warning, speaking in a low, flat voice. No greeting, no badge. We're gathering information on aerial phenomena observed from this property on the evening of November 23rd at approximately 6:37 p.m. His specificity stopped me cold. I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen, hadn't even written it down. When I asked how he knew, he just repeated weird gathering of information. His appearance was unsettling. His skin looked grey like old paper, with thin, colorless lips. His eyes were so dark that pupils and irises blended together. He didn't blink, not once. Standing on my drizzle-covered porch with the overhead light buzzing, he stared intensely. I didn't want him inside, so I insisted he ask his questions right there. His questions were eerily precise, as if reading from a script. Describe the number and arrangement of lights observed. Describe the direction of travel relative to true north. Describe any changes in sound level or electromagnetic interference. I gave short answers, hoping he'd leave. 3 lights moving east, silent, nothing else. At this, he tilted his head slightly, almost bird-like, and stared with the strangest, most intense gaze I'd ever experienced. I was completely blank, yet waiting as if expecting to correct myself. "Have you shared this observation with any person or agency?" he asked. "No," I answered. And he turned and stepped off the porch after saying, "We thank you for your cooperation." No name, no eye contact, just we. I closed the door, heart racing. The entire interaction lasted maybe 3 minutes. Sitting in the living room with my dog nearby, I tried to calm down. Seconds later, I thought I should check where he went. Maybe get a license plate. I opened the door again. My drive home on Route 9 was late, around 10:30, with a drizzle that had softened to a steady mist making the road glisten. While casually glancing at the GPS, my mind wandering, a pale light suddenly appeared over the field to my right, hovering just above the stalks. Initially, I thought it might be a tractor light left on, but it remained motionless. No sweeping beam, just a soft white glow floating 10 or 12 feet off the ground like a porch lantern suspended in midair. I did what most people would do, slowed down and stopped on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in the drizzle. The car went quiet, except for the wipers. The light stayed perfectly still, no pulsing or making a sound. Later that night, something felt off. My dog, who rarely whines, was making a soft, unusual noise. I walked out to the road and scanned in both directions for about a quarter mile. With the drizzle and my porch light behind me, I should have been able to see a tail light or at least a dark shape moving away. But there was nothing, just the sound of rain on leaves. Back inside, I locked the door and sat down, my hands trembling. An hour later, while making tea, I noticed something peculiar. The man who'd been standing on the porch hadn't been wet at all. My own coat would be soaked within a minute, but his remained completely dry. No umbrella, no water beads on his shoulders, his leather shoes still polished and spotless. The next morning, I checked my old, motion-activated security camera over the garage. It records short clips whenever someone approaches the drive. But that night, nothing. No car pulling in, no person walking up, no one leaving. Just the usual empty driveway. I considered telling someone, but what would I say? That a guy in a suit knew exactly when I saw 3 lights in the sky before vanishing into thin air? A week later, a letter arrived with no return address or postmark. Inside was a plain white paper with the words, "Thank you for your cooperation," written in the same flat, precise tone he'd spoken. I didn't keep the letter. I burned it. And since then, I haven't seen any strange lights. But at night, if a car slows down near my place, I find myself turning off the lights and waiting until it passes. Out in the field, something caught my eye, a strange glow that looked almost like farm equipment at first, but there was absolutely nothing around to explain it. No vehicle, no wires, no connection to anything on Earth. Then it moved, not like any aircraft I'd seen before. Just a sideways slide of about 30 yards, then a complete stop. The radio started acting weird right after that. Static crept in, first a faint buzz, then total white noise, drowning out my station. The dashboard clock blinked to 0 momentarily before resetting. I tried taking pictures, but my phone captured nothing. Just blurry smears where light should have been. Phone cameras never really catch these strange moments clearly. When the lights suddenly vanished, I drove on with shaky hands. The road was empty in a way that made my skin crawl. No trucks, no other cars, no movement at all. The field looked ordinary under my headlights, but something felt off. The world had shrunk down to something tight and unsettling. A black sedan began appearing near my house. It was always parked 2 houses down, perfectly maintained without a single mark. Sometimes the driver's seat was empty. Sometimes a shadow occupied the passenger side. I watched it closely. One afternoon, I saw it pull away, not rushing, just smoothly turning the corner. When I followed it behind a delivery truck, I noticed it never exceeded the speed limit. By the 3rd day, the car's consistent presence felt deliberate. Its positioning was always the same, always with a cold engine. I couldn't shake the feeling something was watching, waiting. Just another ordinary-looking sedan that didn't quite feel ordinary at all. I stopped at the diner on Pine Street, the kind of spot that keeps coffee hot all night and displays pie on the board, even at 2 a.m. after grabbing a hash brown. I noticed the black car had crept closer, idling by the pump. Its tinted windows were so dark you couldn't see inside. For 2 days, the car kept appearing in strange locations. At the grocery near the library, in the church parking lot, always somewhere it didn't belong. Each time I spotted it, a tightness would pinch between my shoulder blades. I mentioned my suspicions to a work friend who'd previously joked about the local UFO guy. His response was a laugh that never reached his eyes. That Friday night, unable to sit alone in my dark apartment, I went to the diner. The parking lot street lamp barely illuminated the edges of a black car just beyond its reach. Inside, the diner felt unnaturally still. Harsh fluorescent lights cast a stark glare across the room where an old man sat eating beans at the counter. Ellie, the waitress who knew me, brought coffee without my asking. I settled into the window booth, watching outside. Two men entered, their appearance precise, crisp white shirts, dark ties, polished shoes, wearing identical vintage cut suits that seemed tailored decades ago. They moved with calculated precision, each step deliberate. One had ash-colored hair neatly combed back. The other bore a slight smirk that suggested he enjoyed saying uncomfortable things. They approached my booth directly. "Are you feeling well since the event?" the taller one asked flatly. For a moment, I thought he was joking. "What event?" I responded, feigning ignorance. I'd told no one about the lights, not even Ellie. The taller man's eyes remained unnervingly calm. His companion blinked, but even that seemed calculated. They stood perfectly mirrored, faces nearly identical, a faint thin of aftershave and rain clinging to them. The diner's air grew colder with their presence. I laughed, that nervous reflex when uncertainty grips you. When they mentioned Miller's Field, I stayed silent. Saying anything would make the moment too real. The taller man spoke in precise mechanical tones. "Continue your routine. Avoid sharing details. We will monitor." My voice felt foreign when I asked, "What do you mean, monitor?" The diner had gone completely quiet. The old man's fork hung suspended mid-air. Ellie stared down at the register, her order pad forgotten. The shorter man pressed a finger on the table like marking an invisible surface. "We are checking for adverse effects," he stated. "You reported no auditory disturbances." They moved with impossible synchronization. Both tilted their heads at the exact same angle. The taller man's smile didn't reach his eyes, matched precisely by the shorter man's identical expression. "I haven't said anything," I said sharply. "Good," they responded in unison. The taller one added, "Keep your schedule. Maintain social. Do not conduct experiments. W tells." The diner fell silent, gripped by an unexplained tension. I stood there flipping eggs, my cap pulled low, trying to will these strange men away. Around me, diners froze. An old man lowered his fork. A woman by the pie case turned pale. A young cook stood motionless. Their words hung heavy in the air. I couldn't comprehend what their cryptic conversation meant. After 2 motionless minutes, they turned and walked to the door with an economical pace. Through rain-streaked windows, I watched their black car, its tinted glass concealing everything inside. In just a few strides, they reached the vehicle. The taller one opened the door, and then they vanished. Since that night, I've been tracking their movements. 2 men in a black car, silent and precise. Their approach felt calculated, almost bureaucratic. No aggression, just a methodical presence like someone closing an administrative file. The encounter was straightforward. They pulled up, slid into the car, and drove slowly down the street. Nothing dramatic. A waitress interrupted with an overly cheerful question about pie. I left a $10 bill and walked out, leaving unfinished coffee behind. Outside, rain fell steadily. Walking home under streetlights, I replayed their cryptic conversation. No new insights emerged, just clipped phrases and a strange instruction to stay quiet. That night, every light in my apartment blazed. I watched the door, anticipating something. A soft knock. Tire sounds. Nothing came. The water by my bed tasted metallic. Sleep became fragmented. My internal clock shifted. I woke earlier than usual, feeling like I was waiting for an unauthorized medical exam. The black car appeared less frequently afterward, but when it did, a visceral dread settled in my stomach. Once I spotted them at the gas station, pale faces and black suits moving past in reflections. They didn't approach. They didn't need to. I told only Aaron, an obituary writer who treats everything as potential comedy, he suggested, ignoring the incident. Ironically, his lack of detailed questioning made me share more. The next day, he recommended documenting everything, so I did. My notebook sits on the kitchen table, pages filled with meticulous details. Times, descriptions, the car, the rain, the diner's coffee smell. I kept driving past Millersfield, parking on the shoulder. The hope of seeing that strange light again burned inside me, a desperate search for proof, wanting to transform this inexplicable experience into something comprehensible. Daylight offered nothing unusual, just the same old broken fence lines I'd always meant to report. But at dusk, an unexplainable glow lingered on the horizon, something my camera could never capture. Now I locked my front door twice. At Anchor and Elm, I serve early morning regulars before sunrise. My world has grown smaller lately. The curtains barely block the street view, and I'm constantly scanning for that black car. Last night on the harbour road with the tide low, something caught my eye. 3 lights hung over the water, moving slow and deliberate like they were pacing something below. They weren't as bright as a plane. I pulled over, climbed onto the break wall, and took some pictures with my phone. On the screen, they looked cleaner. 3 white dots forming a crooked triangle, sometimes wobbling, sometimes steady. Around midnight, I posted the photo in the town's Facebook group with the simple line, "Weird lights over the bay." Anyone else seeing this? I didn't expect much. Most posts were about crab recipes or lost dogs. I fell asleep with the window cracked open, listening to distant gulls and the harbour's hum. Something fundamental has shifted, and I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. After finishing my deliveries, I sometimes sit alone in the diner, eating a late sandwich. Nobody really asks about my health anymore. The next morning was like any other Tuesday. Foggy grey light made the lamps look like moons. I clocked in, wiped the steam wand, flipped the sign. The post had 2 comments, one about selling a boat, another just saying, "Wow, nothing urgent." An older man in a wool coat took the corner table reading the paper. More people came in. Then a little after 9, when the morning rush settled into a steady hum, I looked up and saw them. 2 men in black suits, the kind you see in movies about government things. No badges, no name tags. They didn't walk like tourists or townsmen. Their movements were purposeful. Heels set, shoulders fixed. They stopped exactly at the service counter where I was pouring coffee and stacking muffins. They just stood there. No order, no small talk. The men didn't need to threaten me. When they asked if I was feeling well, there was no warmth. I was just a procedure to be completed, then closed like a file in a cabinet, pushed shut with the same measured force every time. Their clean suits and short hair didn't draw attention. 2 men stood motionless at the counter, one taller with a fade, the other shorter with a narrow jaw. They stared directly at me without blinking, not even once. At first, I thought they were just intensely focused on a pastry case. The cafe hummed with its typical midday rhythm. Regular customers seemed unaware. Pete, arriving at 9:30 for his usual sausage and egg, smiled casually. A woman with a stroller nearby scrolled through her phone before leaving without a second look. Their complete indifference struck me as strange. Yet something held me back from questioning the situation. I rationalized my hesitation as pure exhaustion. Eventually, I gathered enough courage to ask, "Can I help you fellas with anything?" The shorter man barely turned his head. No real movement, no sound. The taller one gave a minimal nod that somehow felt like a complete response. Their posture revealed everything, shoulders slightly forward, chin set, the stance of men accustomed to absolute authority. Each time I glanced over, they occupied subtly different positions, always precise, always calculated. Like actors who had memorized every minute gesture. 2 more men arrived, holding folded newspapers, making the scene even more surreal. They remained motionless until the taller one looked at my name tag and spoke in a flat, measured tone. "Everything all right?" His question felt weighted, coming from someone who'd been watching me unblinkingly. The shorter man then started asking pointed questions about my recent experiences. "Have you slept since the event? Any headaches?" Ringing in the ears disrupted appetite. His words made the coffee in my hand feel bright and acidic. I suddenly realized I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen. Not my mother, my boss, or even the online group where I'd half-joked about the lights. At least 15 minutes had passed and nothing had changed. 2 men approached, their expressions unreadable. I explained something that felt like a confession, though unintentionally. The taller man's instructions were clear. Continue routine. Avoid sharing details. If any symptoms worsen, consult your physician. A folded paper with a small embossed barcode-like rectangle appeared on the counter. Suddenly, the diner went silent. A tray clattered in the back, creating a brief disruption before everything returned to stillness. The 2 men straightened, signaling it was time to leave. They walked out smoothly through the bell and into the fog, moving without touching the door or drawing attention. What unsettled me most was what happened afterward. No one seemed to remember the 2 men. The man at the corner table claimed he hadn't seen them. Ellie at the register had no recollection, despite being right there. Pete said he'd been on his phone. The woman with the stroller appeared oblivious. When I pressed for details, people looked at me with that blank, puzzled expression reserved for someone who seems overtired. My cafe photos that morning showed typical scenes. People moved through their usual routines with closed mouths, but something felt off. Two men near the counter didn't appear in any footage. Someone from the local Facebook group messaged me privately after seeing my picture, asking if I was okay. By noon, Harbor Patrol was investigating reports about strange lights. My favorite shot later revealed something unexpected. 3 lights hung clear over the water. In the background, barely visible, stood 2 shapes near the shoreline. Black-dressed figures stood as straight as telephone poles. Initially, I thought it was a light trick. Zooming in confirmed their presence. A taller figure with hands forward, a shorter one with a tilted head. They were exactly where the men had stood that morning. Ellie, who'd worked mornings for 6 years, noticed something was off. She suggested I might be more tired than I realized, saying gently, "You've got a lot going on?" I wanted to argue but knew it would prove nothing. I told her I was fine and tried to move on, though something continued to nag at the back of my mind. The night settled in as I rode the late bus home under a low sky, muffin cases stacked until my arms ached. Fog had lifted, and bay lights had vanished. Back home, my roommate's friends were loud and cheerful, but sleep eluded me. At 2 a.m. I got up to use the bathroom. The kitchen was dark and silent, broken only by a sudden phone notification. A direct message from an unrecognizable user contained the same photo I'd taken of 3 lights, but its timestamp predated my original post. No username, no caption. I studied the little card they'd left, noticing a dull rectangle where ink had been pressed into the paper. It looked like nothing and everything simultaneously. Days passed, and I expected something to happen. I waited to be questioned, told to stop posting, or given instructions. Driving past the harbor, I watched the water and sky for anything unusual. Black cars would occasionally appear, adding to a growing sense of unease. At the marina, my phone sometimes glitched. The camera would freeze, showing a still from earlier, as if stuck in yesterday. Looking twice, something would be gone. The cafe's security footage had a strange moment at 9:15, a 10-second stretch where the video feed pixelated and returned without audio. The system logged it as a temporary fault. After replacing the cable, nothing else happened. When I mentioned the lights, people at the shop changed the subject, joking about Maya's late-night lighthouse spotting. Later that week, I checked the Facebook thread. The original post had been taken down, with a moderator sending a private note explaining posts sometimes get flagged and removed. No one else remembered seeing the 2 women in the shop. Wall camera footage showed normal activity. People moving, talking, steaming milk. The supposed tableau of 2 women in black appeared only in my photo. I went home each night, locking the door and sleeping with the light on. The 2 women didn't return. Lights over the bay were reported here and there for a couple weeks. Then nobody talked about them anymore. My photo remained in my camera roll, a small piece of evidence that looked like a trick. The old red barn stood silent among 3 fields, with a windbreak of cottonwood starting to sag, our grandparents' place where Claire and I live. Outside, I was battling mosquitoes, lighting the last of the coils, while Rex, our lab, sniffed around the back porch. That's when everything changed. The henhouse went completely quiet. At first, I thought maybe a fox was prowling, but then I realized every single bird had frozen solid, like someone had hit pause on a remote. Then, a slow light began moving across the field. This wasn't a typical night scene, no airplane strobes, just a pale disk hovering low about telephone pole height against the cottonwood trees. It drifted deliberately from the east hedgerow toward the pond, gliding without hurry and making absolutely no sound. The only evidence of its movement was a faint shift in the grass, a cool glow sliding past like a painter's torch. I stopped posting to the group and told my roommate a toned-down version. Just a weird morning, that was all. Sometimes while washing dishes, I'd find myself watching the street long after everyone had gone to bed. When fog rolled in off the water, I'd step outside, breathe the cold dampness, and check how the light hit the harbor. Nothing dramatic. I grabbed my phone and snapped photos, but they were useless. Just washed-out dots against black. Claire came out in her slippers, leaning her forehead on my shoulder and muttering, "What the hell?" as if I might have some explanation. Rex sat by the fence, unusually calm, watching with that focused attention dogs get when something unusual catches their eye. We watched it drift past the pond, over the woodlot, and then vanish into darkness like someone had simply plucked a light from the sky and tucked it away. We didn't call anyone. Who would believe us? The sheriff would probably laugh us off. The next morning, strange things started happening. My pickup's battery was dead, though I'd left no lights on. The radio had a split second of static at noon, which was odd. Outwardly, nothing changed. I kept counting days and maintaining routines. Internally, something was different. No knock at the door, no late-night visits, just the regular world. My manager joked that maybe the city needed me as their official weather reporter. I laughed and went back to work, pouring coffee. I knew a shape the way you know a bruise. It wasn't obvious at first, but you can't unknow it. Now, I kept the photo on my phone, opening it occasionally to stare at the background until the image blurs. I'm hoping some answer will emerge from the grey, but nothing has stepped forward yet. 2 women had lingered by the counter earlier, asking questions without really asking, then left as if they'd never been here. The weather had been strange lately, still and humid, with odd occurrences on farms. Grandma Ellen, who had lived on this land for 50 years, listened silently to our story. Claire's watch had mysteriously lost 5 minutes, and then found itself an hour later. The hens behaved unusually, clustering tightly in a different part of the coop and refusing to go near the tea hedge. Claire mentioned dreaming of standing in a field and hearing voices in the grass, laughing it off over coffee while keeping her purse close. I considered these just a series of odd coincidences, but when I checked the old game camera on the corner post by the pond, a clip made my stomach drop. The file showed 6 seconds of black, then static, then 6 more seconds of black. No image at all. The timestamp read 2 a.m. while the hens had gone quiet around 11 p.m. The light had gone out maybe at 11:13. These times weren't the same, but close enough to create patterns in my mind. We discussed the light minimally, with Claire putting dishes away and rubbing her palms together in her usual nervous gesture. Maybe we should call somebody, she said, just to put it on record. We agreed we would do so the next day, feeling safer than acting immediately. He came the next evening. While it was still light, a soft, polite knock, the kind you'd expect from a neighbor returning a cup of sugar, surprised me. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. Standing on the porch was a man in a dark suit that looked too new for the gravel drive. Clean shoes, neat coat, no hat. His hair was close-cropped, the color of river rock. He looked like someone who'd accidentally stepped out of a downtown office onto a farm. Evening, he said, speaking without the usual small talk. I apologize for the intrusion. May I have a glass of water before we discuss last night? The words came out soft and flat, like someone reading from a card. He didn't wait for an offer, only had to say the words, and the rest followed. Something was peculiar about the phrase, before we discussed last night. He said it as if we were expected to have things to discuss, as if the visit wasn't a surprise. Rex whined softly, ears flattened as Claire's dish towel dropped to the floor. Grandma Ellen's knitting slipped from her hands. I glanced over my shoulder, taking in the scene around me. The county official had arrived earlier, unremarkable and inscrutable. His eyes were unblinking, a color that defied simple description. I'd assumed he was just another worker passing through during fair season. I offered him water, which he accepted with a practiced grip. The glass remained untouched when I noticed he hadn't taken a sip. "You okay?" I asked, feeling awkward. He set the glass on the porch rail and spoke with precise economy. "Would you describe what you observed? No notes, no technology, just direct inquiry and patient waiting." So I recounted everything. The pale disk hovering over the pond, sliding into the trees and vanishing. The hens froze. Rex watched. The camera captured only a blank clip. At 2:12 a.m., someone mentioned losing time on their watch. Grandma Ellen had spoken of a dream. He nodded after each detail, seemingly cataloguing information internally. When he leaned forward and asked about potential side effects like auditory phenomena or headaches, I thought of Brenda from the feed store and her tinnitus. "No," I assured him, "nothing unusual." After my account, he simply said, "We thank you for your cooperation." Without taking the glass, he stood and walked off the porch. He moved through the gate toward the pond, weaving between trees like someone navigating a familiar path. Within 30 yards, the light through the leaves swallowed him completely. Hours passed. The sun dipped. Corn, shimmered. Crickets awakened. Later, with darkness settled and the porch light glowing, I examined the glass. When I poured its contents into the sink, nothing emerged. No liquid, no trace, no hint of evaporation. The glass rim was dry, cool. Running my fingers inside revealed no waterline, no mineral residue, as if the water had never existed. We lived on familiar ground. Farmland, open fields, places where storms and coyotes were expected companions. But something felt different. At night, sleep eluded us behind closed windows with the porch light burning. My pickup's tailgate would lock itself even when down. The couple of doors stood shut when I'd left them open. Around noon, the shop radio would cut to 2 seconds of static across different stations. Grandma Ellen kept her porch light on until I asked her to stop, worried about disturbing Rex's hens. No sign of the suited man ever returned. No vehicle parked on the road that might match his demeanor. I eventually placed the glass among other dishes, attempting to treat it as something ordinary. Yet memories would surface, the hens frozen like statues, the quiet field with a single light moving across velvet, like a hand, and how the man's tongue never moved when speaking. I don't frame this as an event or a visitation. I'm not spinning tales about UFOs or hidden secrets. People hold on to small, bright mysteries when the world offers them. Little wonder. He asked for water, left it on the porch, and by morning it was gone. We continued our chores. Something shifted on the highway shoulder near midnight. Returning from a job in the next county, traveling that long, lonely single lane, I noticed my headlights change from normal yellow to a bright blue in an instant. Seasons had passed. The hens had returned to pecking near the east hedge, and sometimes at night I still glanced toward the pond. Other drivers seemed unaware. They cut past without slowing, maintaining their lanes as if nothing unusual occurred. Then, hovering over the tree line to the east, a light appeared. At first it resembled a construction sign glowing above the road. But this was different, hanging stationary about 100 feet above the guardrail, like a lamp someone had suspended in midair. I killed the engine on the shoulder, needing stillness. Rain hissed softly on the hood, while my disconnected phoneless signal left me isolated. Instead of trying to film, which always feels like admitting fear, I watched for 5 minutes, observing the scene carefully. Cars passed beneath the light, close enough to flag down, yet no one stopped. Something strange was happening. The vehicle seemed to move around an invisible presence. What I saw was a clean, pale disc with a soft white and blue wash that defied description. Suddenly, the radio erupted into static. Not a gradual fade, but an abrupt white roar as if disconnected from any recognizable source. The digital thermometer flickered briefly, dropping 2 deg before settling back to normal. These tiny details slip past you until suddenly they don't. A truck rumbled 2 lanes over, its driver staring straight ahead, mouth moving silently. No slowdown. Then the light shifted sideways, not sharply, but like something gently nudged across a table. Crossing the median, I stopped. The air felt different, not from wind or pressure, but as if an invisible curtain had been drawn. My mind drifted to a pot of coffee left on a burner, its lingering aroma somehow capturing this suspended, unexplained moment. Darkness weighed heavily that night. An inexplicable instant punctured the silence. Something in the sky simply winked out, vanishing instantly like a photograph torn away. No sound. No echo. Just stillness. I drove home cautiously, keeping just below the speed limit. Returning to my own bed after such a strange experience felt oddly mundane. Turning off the main road, I entered my neighborhood's oldest strip home to a 24-hour market and gas station, desperate for fuel and coffee. Marco, a kid who knew me from a previous job, waved me toward Pump 3. Inside the store, diesel and peppermint gum scents mixed under harsh fluorescent lights. 2 men stood at the counter, clearly out of place. Their dark suits and polished black shoes spoke of downtown offices, not roadside stops. One was tall with a square, chiseled jaw. The other, slimmer with a thin nose and close-cropped beard, stood motionless by the cooler, purchasing nothing. When the doorbell chimed, they turned in perfect unison. Small details caught my attention. Their gaze locked onto me, unblinking. A barely noticeable scuff marked the shorter man's right shoe. After my unsettling night, I felt like prey. "Hello," I blurted out. Silence stretched between us. "Sir?" He spoke with clinical precision. "You were on Route 47 earlier this evening, were you not?" The statement landed more like a declaration than a question, instantly unnerving me. I hadn't mentioned my route to anyone. "Yeah," I nodded, explaining I was... The next question was strange. "Did you observe any aerial lights approximately 8 miles east of the bridge?" My throat constricted. "Yes," I confirmed. They listened, utterly motionless, not even breathing. Not a shorter man studied his hands, then looked up in a way that made me examine his face twice. His expression was neither hostile nor welcoming, but puzzled. He wanted exact details, pressing me to describe the precise color of the lights, not just a generic white or blue, but the specific shade from my memory. His request was oddly precise. I hesitated, considering how challenging it can be to recall colors, especially from a nighttime experience. The light appeared pale, reminiscent of an overcast day, yet with a coolness that edged toward blue. When I blinked, I described it as soft white with a blue wash, more blue than halogen, but softer than neon, like the gentle blue you'd see in a pale winter window. Clean, yet not electric. A subtle exchange passed between them. A quick movement, a tightening at the corner of the taller man's mouth, the shorter man tilting his head, as if sharing an unspoken understanding. The moment was brief, but felt significant. The taller man's face went blank. For the first time, he truly met my eyes. Confusion flickered across his features. "Excuse us," he said abruptly, causing Marco at the register to glance up. They thanked me for my time and stepped back, as if the conversation was finished. They departed exactly as they arrived, straight through the glass door, purchasing nothing, not even touching the pumps. With purposeful determination, they walked into the rain. I watched them go, expecting them to enter a car, but no vehicle waited in the station lot. Absurdly, I imagined they'd hidden behind a truck, yet no vehicle could conceal two grown men without making a sound. I paid for my coffee in cash. Marco didn't request a receipt. Outside, the rain intensified, streetlights blooming into halos. Fumbling my keys, I felt strangely disconnected, like emerging from a daydream beneath an old billboard. Settled in my car with the heater running and coffee's aroma lingering, I watched the station's edge. 10 minutes later, a black sedan rolled slowly past. In the weeks following that night, I drifted through my routine. County roads, yard work, everyday tasks continued as normal, yet something felt different beneath the surface. Small glitches caught my attention more carefully now. The electrical hum in the house would skip unexpectedly. Moments emerged that left me unsettled. My phone losing carrier signal while on hold, the oven clock blinking 2:12 a.m. and correcting itself. Standing in the kitchen one evening, I found myself staring out the window for 6 minutes, with no recollection of my thoughts. These interruptions made me watch the edges of my life more closely. The color question kept replaying in my mind, feeling like an odd thing to ask. Researchers might want exit data or wavelength, but a stranger inquiring about the shade of blue seemed more like a journalist's approach than anonymous men at a gas station. During my next gas stop, I shared the story with Marco. He shrugged like a typical city kid, remembering a black, clean car passing through the lot that night. He wasn't certain about the two men at the counter, suggesting they might have been suited guys getting coffee. A week later, an intriguing discovery awaited me. Walking to my car, I spotted a small folded paper on a pickup's bumper. It was a gas station receipt printed at 11:43 p.m., matching the time of the encounter. On the back, someone had neatly written color and underneath, a single letter B. I tucked the paper into my pocket, contemplating who to tell. The county office? The local paper? A blog? But each time I tried to form the call, it felt like a small private matter, the kind of thing you might whisper over a fence. Cassia, a nurse, offered a simple response when I finally shared the story. "You were precise." "Good, keep it that way." Her professional tone suggested she wanted to advise but held back. What lingered wasn't really the men's question or their exchanged looks. Something else remained, undefined and subtle. The third night of a long weekend trip, lights appeared over the lake. We were camping by a clear pond. A rickety boat launch sat in a vault oiled with the smell of pine. 5 of us, me, Alex, Maya, Brent, Lena and Omar, had tents set up on the ridge above the water and a fire pit down by the shore. Our usual getaway spot was far from town, with no cell service and quiet surroundings. We'd spent the hours throwing a frisbee that kept getting blown off course, eating hot dogs, and then sitting quietly around the fire with our headlamps off. Around 11 o'clock, the night settled into a different rhythm. Bren was mid-story about a raccoon in his neighbor's trash when things felt unusually quiet. Frogs across the water had their own soundtrack, and the fire crackled softly. The night away from the city had a distinct cadence. Maya suddenly asked, "Hey, do you see that?" At first I thought she meant the moon, but about 100 yards over the pond, 3 pale lights hung around 20 feet above the water surface. They moved together slowly, as if carried by invisible cables, except there was no boat, no rope, no sound. The lights drifted slightly, paused, then slid sideways in perfect synchronization. Reflecting later, I noticed their surprise wasn't about my honesty, it was something else entirely. Their brief confusion felt like a script, unexpectedly breaking on the wrong page. No threat, no alarm, just a subtle mismatch. The world didn't rearrange itself. The station remained open. Marco kept the coffee warm. Traffic continued along the highway. The next time I drove past, only the rain-slicked road's white glare remained. I kept the receipt folded in my glove compartment for a long time, eventually throwing it away when moving some maps. The memory of that night feels different, less like a movie scene and more like a small, unexpected floor tile you suddenly notice. Our group sat together, processing what we'd witnessed over Clear Pond. The marshmallow sticks lay forgotten as I pulled out my phone to capture the scene. The camera struggled, but we all saw the 3 lights moving silently together, hovering about 20 feet up before fading. Capturing them on screen made the experience feel more tangible, more real. Lights danced across the distant shore, sparking wild theories at our campsite. Bren thought they might be fishing lights, while Lena suspected nearby weekend campers with drones. Yet something felt off. These weren't typical lights. No standard LED flickering, no color shifts, no normal navigation beacon patterns. Nature remained eerily undisturbed around us. Frogs continued their nightly chorus without interruption. Ducks stayed put. The water's surface remained perfectly still. After about 20 minutes, the lights gradually dimmed, as if someone had slowly turned down an invisible switch. We sat quietly, waiting and wondering if they might reappear. Conversation became hushed and uncertain. Camp routine continued despite our restlessness. We went through familiar motions, brushing teeth, setting boat launch alarms, checking the cooler. Lena felt something moving near the tent, but her headlamp revealed nothing when she checked. We laughed about potentially contacting the local newspaper, though what we really craved was breakfast and coffee. Sunrise brought an unexpected arrival, an unmarked dark sedan. Pulling into the drive, 2 men in crisp, well-tailored suits emerged, walking with deliberate purpose. "Morning," the taller man said flatly. Directly, he continued, "We heard you observed aerial lights over Clear Pond last night. Can you describe what you saw?" Our group exchanged knowing looks, silently deciding how to respond. I described 3 lights moving together over the water, silent and synchronized. Omar added specifics about their hovering behavior. Bren stressed how they didn't resemble standard flares. Each of us pieced together fragments of an unexplained encounter. 2 men in black suits arrived at our site, moving with an almost administrative precision. We had gathered together, sharing strange occurrences from our expedition. Each of us recounted odd experiences that didn't seem quite right. My camera photos were nothing but smudged dots. Video files appeared to have stuttered inexplicably. Bren spoke about a high-pitched ringing during bright moments. Lena described her phone powering off and on twice while trying to take a photograph, and Maya's pocket compass had spun erratically before settling. The conversation felt oddly methodical. These 2 men, one shorter, one taller, listened with an unnatural stillness. They didn't take notes or use phones. Instead, they watched our faces intently, interrupting only to request pure observation without explanation. We complied, describing our experience with meticulous precision, detailing the light's reflections on water, its color, temperature, and exact movement. The taller one spoke first, his words carefully measured and professional. The shorter man, who seemed to never blink, asked about potential electronic interference. Our devices had indeed been acting strangely. They listened intently to our accounts, nodding at each detail without taking a single note. When we tried to press them about their identity, they responded with minimal, identical smiles. "We're conducting routine follow-up in the area," they said. Their answers deliberately vague. Subtle oddities about them became increasingly apparent. Their skin appeared untouched by wind, and their dark, coffee-ground-colored eyes didn't seem to blink normally. Maya had quietly mentioned this to Omar, who acknowledged it but didn't want to vocalize the observation. Instead of seizing our evidence or conducting an intense interrogation, they simply asked if anyone else knew about our observations. Had we shared anything on social media or contacted others? Lena and I confirmed minimal communication, just a single community page photo and a few casual mentions. When the coffee pot hissed in the ranger station, the shorter man asked plainly for everyone's names, not reaching for a notebook or phone, just waiting. One by one we responded. Something felt off. I remember thinking I should request identification, because the scenario felt like the start of something unsettling. The shorter man tilted his head and simply stated, "Names are not necessary here," his response courteous but final. They turned and walked toward the perimeter of our campsite. Their movement seemed normal at first, two men walking back into the woods. But instead of following our usual footpath, they stepped directly into the trees. The brush swallowed their sound completely. We watched as morning light gradually obscured their shapes. They moved straight among the trees, and then they were gone. We had been camping on a quiet, empty path with just a few trees and no other vehicles at the entrance. The tree trunks seemed to walk down an invisible hallway after the men disappeared. No rustle of leaves, no disturbance. The light through the pines looked exactly the same as before they entered. Omar drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Lena kept rubbing her eyes, saying something about the man's coffee-colored eyes making her skin crawl. Maya laughed nervously at jokes that weren't funny, and Bren talked about how thin the air felt, like you could hear your own breath too clearly. We followed the county's procedure and called the ranger, but he was out checking a damage sign and didn't arrive for 40 minutes. When he finally came and we described the encounter, he nodded slowly, took our names, and made notes. Yet, when he drove off to check the trail cameras, there was nothing to be found. The mud near the boat launch bore no marks except our own, and we packed up faster than planned. No one wanted to fish or swim after what happened. Back home, I reviewed the photos. One picture I thought captured the lights best showed a thin grey line near the tree line where, for a split second, the taller man's shoulder was barely visible. Blown up, it was just grain and shadow. Nothing definitive. Maya's phone had a similar smudge, and Bren claimed his camera had corrupted the last two files. Lena insisted her compass had spun on its own for 15 minutes after we left the site. I wasn't sure what to make of any of it. I posted about the incident in the local group thread, using our real names to create a public record, not to start rumors. Some people said they'd seen lights on the road days earlier. Others suggested it was people with LED kites. One comment warned that people like us shouldn't camp alone. Bugs made their steady shush through the leaves as I hiked above the third switchback on the Ridgeway Trail. I knew this terrain well, understanding exactly when to put my phone away or take it out. Something appeared that initially looked like a reflection, maybe sunlight dragging across the stream or a poorly timed flashlight. But it was higher than the tree line, definitely not a reflection. Silver and massive, perhaps 20 to 30 feet across, flattened like a coin suspended on its edge. Its movement was slow and deliberate, without jerks or wings. No sound accompanied it. Birds continued flying past, undisturbed. The air remained unchanged. I switched on my camera, hands slightly shaky. Aware I might later need to defend, this wasn't a hallucination. The clip didn't capture much, just the usual grainy darkness, the silver object reduced to a smear. But when I replayed it, the motion looked peculiar. The object slid left, paused, then drifted behind the ridgeline. I stayed put for a long time, sweating and thinking. That night, I didn't post the clip anywhere. I told myself I'd sleep on it, but sleep never came. The next day, I watched the footage on my laptop, knowing digital media can be untrustworthy. Cameras crop and compress, and phone cameras struggle in low light. Ben, who runs the outdoor blog I write for, received a noisy file from me. Within 5 minutes, he'd responded. Ren mentioned the incident twice at work, but his colleagues just shrugged it off. Every so often, I open the folder with the photos, zooming in on the smear and the recording. trying to steady it into her face. The next day, a woman who writes a bird-watching column asked to ask questions but never followed up. A ranger dropped by with a business card from the Division of Natural Lands, leaving it on the porch and mentioning he'd checked with County Dispatch about any missing person reports. No agencies contacted us, and local police never responded. The two men who were polite were in suits. They asked us to recount our observations without writing anything down. They said names weren't necessary. They walked into the woods and vanished. I drove home and called the ranger's carbon number once, leaving a message. They never returned. The two men had asked polite, specific questions before walking into the trees and disappearing without a trace. We returned to our normal lives, work and routines, but the memory lingered. Life settled back into its small, tolerable routine. Work shifts, the same coffee mug, the same guy at the bus stop, absorbed in his newspaper. But those two men turning toward the pines and vanishing keep haunting me, and now I find myself checking the closed door twice before bed. I filmed the moment because it felt too significant to let slip away. What seemed small and sensible at the time was something I couldn't ignore. Something strange was unfolding, starting with a familiar joke between friends. While hiking, I noticed the landscape felt off. The leaves didn't rustle when I passed. At exactly 2:13 a.m., strange occurrences began to punctuate my days. My wall clock slipped forward a minute. The bedside alarm blinked and corrected itself even after I turned it off. I started walking where light hit the windows, almost searching for seams. 2 nights after the hike, a black sedan appeared outside my house. An older model, but in near-perfect condition. It was parked under the street lamp across from my place. My narrow lane isn't typical for overnight parking unless someone's visiting. The car sat motionless, windows heavily tinted, headlights off, no engine noise disturbing the lane that smelled of cut grass and warm asphalt. Gus, my dog, usually sound asleep, got up and sat by the door. He wasn't barking, just staring. His gaze felt like a warning. When the car left, it moved slowly and quietly, rolling away and disappearing at the first intersection, as if it only wanted to be seen leaving. For a week, the sedan appeared with remarkable consistency. Always at 2:13 a.m., always in the same spot. I tried catching someone getting out, even stepping into my backyard in shorts and flip-flops, calling out toward the lane. My voice sounded absurd against the silence. The car remained motionless. Once, I thought I glimpsed a silhouette in the passenger side, someone leaning forward, but when I blinked it was gone. My neighbor walking his dog early one morning thought I looked tired when I asked about the car. He glanced over and it seemed empty. And I started logging every detail with obsessive precision. An old analog watch hung by the wall clock, meticulously measuring time. My surveillance methods grew increasingly elaborate. A cheap motion camera went up on the porch, and I left hallway lights on with blinds open. Some nights, I'd sit in my car, engine running, radio low. Each night brought new doubts. Was this really a co-worker's vehicle? The nightly visits had become an unsettling ritual, precise and unnerving. Then kept pushing for video footage, wanting to run it through enhancement filters. I was reluctant. This felt like private proof, something to hold on to just in case. I made copies of the footage, sliding one into an SD card hidden in my drawer. Nights passed, and I slept with lights on, growing increasingly uneasy. On the 8th night, everything changed. The car's pattern shifted dramatically. I stayed until 3:01 a.m., then 3:02, and it turned down the block and stopped right across from my house. I couldn't take it anymore. With keys and flashlight, I went out. Gus, my dog, followed but stopped at the doorway. He's not confrontational. The car's windows were black. Its license plate looked ordinary, but when I shined my light, the digits blurred into shapeless forms. Feeling exposed and foolish, I called out, trying to sound assertive. Nothing happened. Then the passenger window rolled down a bay, finger's width. A hand reached out, tapping the driver's side window with almost mechanical precision. No sound, no door open, no one stepped out. The car idled with an unsettling radioactive patience. I stood there a long minute, waiting for some human reaction. A shuffling of feet, a phone, buzz. Nothing came. The car's interior remained a dark cave, and I felt my face burn hot with foolishness as I walked back inside. For the next 2 days, the car remained. Gus would sit by the window and watch, never barking. Ben arrived the following weekend with his big binoculars and skeptical face, spending an afternoon on my roof. He told me to slow down on the paranoia and advised giving plates or calling the cops if someone was following me. That night I tried to do just that when I saw the sedan again. Dialing 911s, the dispatcher said without a clear threat, there wasn't much they could do. I was told to call back in the morning with a description. I felt ridiculous yet safe enough to be ignored. Strange things started happening. The porch camera captured something weird. A black rectangle about a meter wide where my car had been, replacing the vehicle in an instant. When I reviewed the video frame by frame, nothing made sense. One moment the street existed, the next a column of nothing, then the street reappeared. The camera logged the clip at 21:37. The garage DVR told a similar story. My phone, which normally charged fine on the nightstand, now failed and showed only a black screen. About a week later, I spotted the car at the intersection's end and drove up behind it. My plan was simple. Follow at a sensible distance, hoping the driver would turn so I could catch the plate number. I trailed like a shadow, maintaining a perfect 50-yard gap. The car's speed remained constant. We passed one stoplight, then another. At the second light, the car in front eased forward and, without warning or signal, vanished. The road ahead was empty, the GPS showing a solid line. I checked the mirror for brake lights. Nothing. A quick tap on the horn, and suddenly the car reappeared at the next bend, idling at the curb as if waiting for me to notice something specific. I was close to admitting the truth to myself. This wasn't random. This wasn't a simple prank. The perpetrator would need money and saint-like patience. Tuesday arrived with rain that felt like someone was rinsing the world. Gus wagged his tail but didn't bark when the knock came. The digital clock on my microwave flickered to 2:13 a.m. Just as the first knock landed, 3 precise sounds echoed on the front step. When I opened the door, 2 men stood in darkness, their black umbrellas folded like swords, long coats draped over immaculate suits. They weren't what you'd expect at this hour: crisp, tailored suits and polished shoes, faces neither young nor old. Neutral expressions, but their eyes carried an unsettling intensity. The taller one spoke first, his voice reminiscent of a radio announcer, stripped of warmth. My heart raced. I hadn't told anyone about the footage. The hidden SD card felt suddenly heavy in my drawer. "Who are you?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. The shorter man responded slowly. "We're with the office. We need to review the original file." I started to ask how they knew, then stopped. They seemed calm, almost reasonable. The tall one's hands spread open, palms up, a gesture that somehow felt both conciliatory and threatening. "You can hand it over, or we can wait," he said. A familiar stubbornness rose in me. I could surrender the SD card and potentially end this strange encounter, or I could resist. "I don't want anyone going through my things," I said. "If you're law enforcement, show a badge." They exchanged a knowing glance, the kind shared by people who understand something privately. Law enforcement arrived, stating their purpose as casually as someone discussing the weather. A shorter man joined in, his movements precise. I responded slowly, my throat tight, to their inquiry about any noise. They exchanged synchronized smiles that sent a chill down my spine. "Thank you for your cooperation," the taller one said. The shorter man nodded, seeming to check something off an invisible list before they turned and walked away, stepping off the porch into rainy darkness. No vehicle waited. They vanished like figures slipping behind heavy curtains, leaving only a lingering memory of their strange visit. Gus stopped pacing by the window at 2:13. The porch camera never again captured that odd black rectangle. No car appeared. Days later, I handed the SD card to Ben and recounted the fragmented story. He requested to keep a copy and ran the file through filters, yet it remained a mere silver smear to any curious observer. Ben warned me not to share it, mentioning a phone call from someone claiming to be a reporter asking about his source for outdoor phenomena. He dismissed the caller, stating he worked with freelance contacts. After 2 men requested the file, things returned to normal. The microwave clock stopped blinking at unusual times, but the feeling never truly departed. I still scan the trees when wind falls silent. Some nights, I sit with my phone, watching time shift. I continue my routine, working, hiking the ridgeway when weather permits. Occasionally, I retrieve the clip, studying the silver smear and wondering what those porch visitors observed. They spoke minimally. "We need to review the original file. We're not here to cause trouble." They left the incident on a small, unresolved shelf of my life. Nightstand. Half asleep, I mistook it for an alarm in that soft space between dreams and waking. The phone rang, breaking the quiet. It was Eric, and something felt off. His voice carried a nervous tension I'd rarely heard before. "What did you send me?" he demanded. I was confused. I hadn't sent anything. Eric insisted he'd received a photo from my number. My screen showed nothing. No recent messages, no sent images. I checked my gallery. Everything looked normal. The last picture was from the previous weekend. Then Eric forwarded the photo. My stomach tightened as I looked. The glow wasn't bright like a spotlight, but diffuse, like an internally lit jellyfish. He described the image: woods at the street's edge, pine and bare oak silhouettes against power lines, with a pale, hazy glow suspended above the trees. The boundary between light and night was indistinct. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "From you," Eric replied. He suggested half-heartedly that maybe my phone was hacked, but if so, why wasn't the image in my messages? I moved to the window, pulling back the curtains. The street was empty. Trees at the block's end stood dark and motionless. Eric sent a screenshot of our message thread, my name at the top, timestamp matching his call. "I'm coming over," he said, hanging up before I could protest. I studied the image's metadata, focusing on the familiar park entrance, a slight incline that seemed to start right from the sidewalk. Something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what. The street remained silent, waiting. At 12:03 a.m., a message arrived with just an image, a JPG file, no additional details. No GPS coordinates, no device information. Eric's text called at 12:20 a.m. "I'm outside. I make no claims about their identity or the mysterious car. I simply know the microwave clock lit up at 23 for a period, then stood on my porch, asking strangely polite questions. Gus now sleeps differently, like someone attuned to subtle changes. No, I threw on a hoodie and headed downstairs." Eric was standing by his running car, phone in hand, looking visibly unsettled. He asked repeatedly if I had sent something, and I confirmed I hadn't. When he turned his phone toward me, the photo glowed faintly on the screen, showing the park entrance with power lines clearly visible. We walked together down the street. A dry cold crept through my layers, making me shiver. Our footsteps echoed loudly, as if the air itself was hollow. At the park entrance, everything appeared completely normal. The wooden sign, the gravel path, the trees dark against the night sky. "No glow," Eric muttered. I kept scanning the tree line, half expecting something to change. Nothing did. I asked if he still had the photo, and he nodded, holding up his phone. "It looks like it's right here over those trees," he pointed. I stared where he indicated, seeing only darkness. We stood there for a long time. Eventually, Eric suggested it might be a spoofed number or some kind of prank. But I challenged him. "Why does the picture look like it was taken here?" He had no response. We returned to my house in silence. He didn't even come inside, just got in his car and left. Upstairs, I sat on my bed's edge with the lights off, my phone on the nightstand. I kept checking messages, waiting for something new to appear. Nothing happened. When I opened my gallery, the same old photos remained. No trace of that glowing shape. But with my eyes closed, I could still see it hovering over the trees, faint and silent, like a lantern suspended underwater. The next morning, Eric's text arrived. The photos were gone from my phone. When I asked what he meant, he explained the image was blank, as if it never existed. I checked our message thread. His screenshot from the previous night remained, but the image he'd received was now just a grey box with a question mark. I scrolled through my photos again. Still nothing new. What happened that night remains a mystery to both of us. Weeks later, I stopped by the park entrance after dark, looking up at the power lines and trees. Sometimes I half expect to see that pale, glowing shape again, waiting where only a camera can catch it. The night was thick with fog, the kind that hangs in the streets like forgotten curtains. The night in Dundee was quiet, unusually so. My delivery route through warehouses and waterfront flats was nearly complete, with the parcel bay half full. After 11 o'clock, the city almost vanishes, and you could almost hear the fog consuming every sound. The late-night local show on my radio felt different from the start. Usually, I keep the volume low, just enough to stay alert. When I turned onto Lockheed Road, the signal dissolved into a strange, thin static, not the typical fade-out hiss, but an insect-like sound that rose and fell like breathing near the aerial. For a moment, everything seemed suspended. The head unit's display blinked, and when I turned the dial, nothing happened. Then it returned, another thin sweep of static, followed by silence. This wasn't a regular signal dropout. Something felt suspended in the air, a hesitation that made me uneasy. The city around me seemed altered. Streetlights blurred into halos that never reached the pavement. Terraces on Tay Street had curtains drawn tight, as if the houses were hiding. No night workers were visible, no smokers outside kebab shops, fewer buses running, fewer sounds to orient myself by. Even the dogs were silent. The constant nighttime hum had been reduced to a mere tick. I tried to rationalize the strange interference, telling myself it was just old buildings or aging van. Wiring. The van itself began behaving oddly. The engine ran warm and steady, but for a heartbeat the dashboard lights dimmed slightly, like someone had briefly tightened a grip on the electrics. It was quick, barely a second, and the heater fan continued spinning as if nothing had happened. I checked the connections, but everything appeared normal. My day had started ordinarily enough. Putting the van into gear and pulling up felt completely routine, one of those small oddities you shrug off when nothing major occurs. I left the rear van doors open, letting fog drift through the back to prevent packages from lingering. Climbing the steps to a first-floor flat, the stairwell lights dimmed as if being watched. A woman answered the door, her hair in a towel, looking like she'd expected noise but received silence instead. She said nothing about it. People don't always comment on what they notice. It's easier to let strange things slide. Back in the van, the radio was acting strange again. Static. Silence. Static. I sat with the heater humming, surrounded by the soft, out-of-focus fog. I pulled up near the docks, fog hugging the van tightly. Something felt off. The familiar route had an unfamiliar edge. Dave from dispatch had called earlier, his voice breaking up mid-conversation, asking me to take an extra parcel. I'd agreed without hesitation, the kind of driver who doesn't say no. An odd smell hung in the air, metallic and sweet, like forgotten pennies. The thought triggered memories of old hospitals and preserved specimens, which I quickly dismissed as ridiculous. Near the weathered warehouses, the fog momentarily thinned, revealing a pale light hovering above the rooftops. This was the third strange occurrence, but the first that felt genuinely unusual. It wasn't a street lamp or ordinary light. A soft white glow about the size of a slow-moving cloud pocket hung level with the terrace roofs, motionless like a misplaced lantern. I pulled over. When something unusual appears, you stop to observe without drawing attention. The streets were completely empty, making such a pause less risky in traffic. The night was eerily silent. No sounds, no movement. Thick fog hung low, streetlights barely cutting through. Rooftops remained dark, windows shuttered. Suddenly, the radio dissolved into static, like a curtain muffling sound. Then a glow shot upward with such intensity that my stomach lurched. It rose straight through the fog, as if an invisible wand had lifted from the ground. No mark, no trailing light, just a momentary clearing in the dense atmosphere before vanishing back into the clouds. Instantly, the radio cleared. Dave's voice came through, asking about my parking location. "Chest too quick," I responded. He mentioned losing my GPS signal, which aligned with my own disorienting experience. My hands trembled, though I convinced myself it was just nerves. The transition felt bizarrely smooth. 1 second disrupted, the next perfectly normal. I completed my deliveries, gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. Gradually, the city resumed its typical rhythm. A pub door slammed somewhere. A taxi rolled past. I stopped at a late-night van for coffee where 2 workers were casually chatting. Kenny was nearby when I finished unloading the final crates. He shrugged off my observations about strange occurrences, suggesting fog plays tricks when you're tired. Exhaustion can indeed rearrange reality's familiar patterns. The night before, Nye was working in Farmington under a clear sky with a slim moon overhead. No unusual weather marked the evening. He'd heard a rumor about drones from someone at the depot. Part story, part small hope. As he drove home, the fog cleared from the roads, a mishap he believed would blow away by morning. The radio played low, a cheeky presenter still talking. Something felt fidgety inside him. An old man waved as he passed, and Nye waved back. A look of weighing lingered on the man's face. He carefully locked up his home. In the kitchen, 3 lamps cast a faint halo, creating a circle of condensation on the window. His partner knew only what sounded reasonable. The radio going on and off, strange bar readings, a bright light, and the fog. She nodded in that familiar way when his work got strange. When she asked if he was all right, he said yes, but the truth was different. His thoughts kept circling back to the quick disappearance of light and the following silence. Amid a sea of small misbehaviors, the radio's sudden clarity was the only reliable detail. He rewatched the dashcam clip repeatedly. A pale blur rose in the fog, with the van and 3 others present. On replay, the footage skipped like poor editing, a wispy blur in one frame, gone in the next. The audio track revealed a side blur, then clear speech. The next night was restless. At dawn, kids played outside while he went about his routine, scraping, sweeping, opening. The fog lingered in small puddles, and a damp smell on washing lines. He drove to work, making rounds on ordinary roads. My own experience echoed his. The dashboard clock jumped 30 seconds before settling. My phone's battery, previously low, now showed full charge. Small inconsistencies accumulated. A missed scanner log, a route taking slightly longer than expected. These minor details left a dull, lingering metallic sensation. He lay in a low-grey evening, listening for radio signals beneath the surface. His memories felt like an unlabeled thing tucked away in a drawer, precise enough to feel real, yet slippery enough to avoid being pinned down. Life has a way of shrinking perspectives. Radios whispered from an unseen layer, faint flight handoffs, a distant cargo truck murmuring on 121.5. A routine leg I'd flown countless times. Something caught my eye through the window. At first glance, it looked like a star, but something was off. Positioned about the same angle as the wing, maybe 5 or 6 miles away. Perfectly level. No blinking, no navigation lights, no strobes, just a dark shape seemingly absorbed into the sky. And something unusual caught my attention during a routine flight. My systems appeared completely normal. PTO heat on, vacuum steady, alternator green, and the panel clock blinking as expected. Cold, damp, binoculars under the glare shield beckoned as I sensed something was off. I reassured myself it was unexpected traffic, maybe a crop duster. Checking transponder identification and scanning for warnings revealed nothing. My display showed the usual blank space where traffic should be. The transponder and equipment seemed normal, yet this object held its position as if belonging in our lane of sky. Through the lenses, I saw a shape unlike any aircraft I'd encountered. Geometric and crisp, it had no windows, no tails, no prop blur. The edges appeared matte, not reflecting any landing lights. Instead of flickering or shimmering, it simply existed and matched our position. I called center. Cessna 7KKG, visual traffic left 2 o'clock. The response came clear. Roger, we show no primary or secondary charge in your area. I double-checked heading and GPS track. The object matched my ground speed, moving as if glued to our velocity vector, perfectly aligned like 2 planes sidling up in an impossible situation. When I turned for a head-on view, the object behaved strangely. I banked right and carefully adjusted the throttles to maintain steady airspeed. The object didn't chase in a straight line. Rather, it reversed momentum, sliding away as if released from an invisible ether. Its movement was like a lazy turn, drifting sideways down the horizon without noise or thermal wake, almost like smoke dispersing in reverse. I moved the yoke, banked left for a better view. Then something indescribable happened. I rolled sideways on an axis, slow and lazy, unlike any airplane's movement. I slid with a fluidity like a model gliding through space. No acceleration, no plume, no wake. We could have been dance partners with unpredictable movements, complicating our shared choreography. I called approach on the guard channel, reporting my tail number and visual traffic at 1 o'clock, matching my altitude and gliding parallel. Their response was clear. No targets on primary in that sector. Only known traffic was showing, including my transponder. The traffic held exactly parallel, rolling away to the west. Static hummed briefly before the controller answered. During the flight, something truly inexplicable happened. In a moment that defied explanation, the object's silhouette shifted. bending light like a lens, narrowing and brightening. Instead of a simple explanation, it suddenly tightened into a point and vanished without any transitional phase or visible mechanism. My communication with the center remained calm. I reported negative 7K, no targets. A small precise noise on my headset suggested something unusual, yet all systems continued operating normally. One moment an indigo cup hung against the lower sky. The next, it disappeared completely. No transit across the stars, no streak. Where it had been was now an empty space, as if someone had lifted a birdcage. Peculiar events followed in the cockpit. My cheap pilot's watch began acting strangely, first running 5 minutes fast, then mysteriously correcting itself. The thermostat on the console inexplicably slid to neutral. My phone, set to record, now contained a single corrupted file that wouldn't open and another with just 3 frames showing a dark smear before turning to blackness. I reported these details to the controller, who logged it for the engineers but didn't request the file. They simply asked if I wanted to divert. I declined. There was nowhere that made sense to go. We continued to Farmington, as if passing through an insignificant fog. My hands hovered above the yoke during approach, feeling safer not touching it directly. The wind remained steady. The runway appeared, and the landing was precisely the controlled descent these instruments train you for. On the ground, I taxied slowly, leaving the lights on because the cabin still held an odd electric coolness I couldn't explain. At the FBO, I filled out paperwork and tried to get someone to examine the files. Maintenance checked my transponder traces, ATC printout and GPS log. They found nothing unusual except a tiny GPS track anomaly showing a half-second ground speed blip. The controllers sent me the radar tape. Where we'd been, everything appeared clean. This sort of thing happens sometimes at night, one of them said, as if that explained anything. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't think there would be a report. Later that night, I was driving home outside Ashtabula when thick, heavy fog rolled in. My name's Dave Hollis, born and raised in this part of Ohio. I'd worked nights at a gas station in town, so foggy drives weren't new to me. But this night felt different. About 5 miles past Geneva, heading west toward home, I encountered something strange. There were headlights in the mist, not normal ones. They seemed to float in the fog, getting closer, but never actually passing me. No engine sound, no tire noise on the wet road, just 2 steady beams cutting through the grey. I was driving through dense fog near Ashtabula when my truck rolled along the gravel shoulder. A soft glow appeared about 50 yards down the road, blue, white, and hazy. It wasn't like any car light or street lamp I'd seen. Just floating maybe 3 or 4 feet off the ground, clear yet somehow undefined. I slowed down, watching the lights. They stayed directly in front of me, maybe 100 yards away, moving as if they wanted to meet me. When I pulled over, the lights simply stopped, hanging there in the fog. Suddenly, a light shot straight up into the sky, as if someone had flipped a switch. It moved in a smooth, fast line and vanished into the clouds above. The moment had lifted, and an eerie silence descended. Every sound disappeared completely. The distant crickets, cars on the highway, even the hum of my truck, all went quiet. I felt like the entire world had paused for a heartbeat. I sat frozen, stunned by the absolute stillness around me. After a moment, I turned off the truck's engine and rolled down the window. Nothing. No birds chirping, no breeze rustling, not even the usual crackling of insects in the weeds. Complete silence blanketed everything. When I finally started the truck again, the mysterious headlights were gone. The fog had thinned slightly, and gradually the normal nighttime sounds began to return. I continued driving, my eyes constantly scanning the shadows and movements in the woods beside the road. Later, when I got home, I filed routine incident notes. But I told my wife a bridged version, not wanting to sound unstable. That empty patch of sky kept turning over in my mind. When I talk about it, people look for explanations. Weather balloon, experimental drone, a trick of the eye. Something has changed in me now. I check everything twice. The transponder, the squitter, the frequency, the wing flex, even the firm under the glare shield. I still fly at night. It's my job, and I've done it a long time. But when I'm on the leg to Farmington and something dark sits where a star used to be, I call it in a little sooner. The controller always says, nothing is showing. They always do. Night had settled in, casting long shadows down the quiet road. Something felt off, though nothing specific had happened during the drive. An eerie sensation lingered, like a whisper just beyond my perception, as if an unseen presence had glided past me in the misty darkness. Once I reached home, my unease didn't fade. I methodically secured each lock, then positioned myself by the window, my gaze fixed intently on the blackness outside, searching for any hint of movement or explanation for the strange feeling that clung to me. The silence was profound, unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Driving through the thick fog near Ashtabula late at night, there's something you need to know about those headlights. Even now, I can't fully explain the light or why I was out there, but I know what I experienced was real. Something happened that night, something that still sends a chill down my spine when I think about it. The darkness and the fog seemed to swallow everything around me, leaving only a strange, unsettling stillness that I'll never forget.